I thought I knew what I was doing when I walked into those woods. I had been out on hikes before, long ones that stretched over whole days, and I always told myself I could handle myself in nature. I carried a small pack with me, a bottle of water, a couple of protein bars, a lighter, and a folding knife. I didn't tell anyone where I was going that day. It was supposed to be nothing serious, just a short trip to clear my head. I drove my car to the side of a quiet road that cut through a dense stretch of forest, locked it, and walked in, thinking I'd be back before dark. The first mile or so was easy. The air smelled sharp with pine, and the sunlight cut through the canopy in scattered beams that lit up the moss and fallen leaves. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of my boots and the faint calls of birds deeper in. I didn't follow a marked trail. I thought I'd just wander a little, loop around, and make my way back. I told myself I had a good sense of direction. That confidence was the first mistake. I walked for maybe an hour before I realized I couldn't see anything that looked familiar anymore. At first, I didn't let it bother me. The forest had a way of looking the same in every direction, but I was sure if I kept a steady line, I'd eventually hit the road again. I stopped a few times, looking back to memorize fallen trees or unusual rocks, but after a while, those markers disappeared. The forest had swallowed me. When I finally tried to turn back, I noticed how the light had shifted. The sun was leaning lower, the shadows growing long and darker. I kept walking a little faster now, but the road didn't show itself. My water bottle was half empty already, and I felt the first sting of unease crawl into my chest. The forest grew thicker the deeper I went. Branches clawed at my jacket, and the ground sloped up and down in uneven ways. I tripped twice, catching myself on roots. My boots were damp from stepping into hidden patches of mud. I looked around, and all I saw were endless trunks, gray and brown, packed so close together that they blocked most of the sky. That was when I admitted to myself that I was lost. I tried to stay calm. I told myself to keep walking in one direction. If I picked east, I thought I'd have to cross a road eventually, or maybe a river. The problem was I didn't know which way east was anymore. The forest canopy was too thick to track the sun properly. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The screen mocked me with its blank bars. Hours slipped away while I stumbled through brush and thick tangles of weeds. The air grew colder as evening settled in. My stomach twisted with hunger, though I forced myself to ration my 2 bars. I sat on a damp log at one point, trying to gather myself, but the silence around me only made it worse. The kind of silence that presses into your ears until you hear your own pulse thudding. When darkness finally fell, it came fast. The woods turned black, swallowing everything. My lighter gave me a flicker of flame, but I knew it wouldn't last long if I tried to keep it going. I found a small clearing and sat there, hugging my knees, listening. That first night was the longest night I'd ever lived through. The forest came alive with noises I couldn't place, snaps of twigs, heavy rustling, something moving just beyond the reach of my vision. Every time I shut my eyes, I imagined something creeping closer. I barely slept. By morning, I was shaking from cold and exhaustion. My throat was dry, my water gone. I knew I needed to find water fast, or I wouldn't last much longer. I walked again, following the dips in the ground, hoping they'd lead me to a stream. My legs burned, my lips cracked. Eventually, I heard it, the faint trickle of water. I almost cried when I found the stream, shallow and narrow, weaving through rocks. I dropped to my knees and drank until my stomach hurt. For a while, I followed the stream, thinking it might lead me out. But streams twist and bend, and before long, I lost track of how far I'd gone. My feet blistered in my boots, and every sound in the woods now set me on edge. Once, I froze when I heard a heavy crunch of leaves behind me. I spun, heart racing, but nothing was there. I started to feel like the forest itself was watching me, though I knew that was just my nerves. The second night was worse than the first. I built a small fire with dry sticks, scared it would burn out too quickly. The light pushed the darkness back a little, but it also made me feel exposed. I kept hearing movements in the trees, heavy, deliberate steps, then silence. I told myself it was deer, maybe a raccoon, but the sound of it was too big, too careful. I gripped my knife in my hand until my knuckles ached. Morning brought no relief. My legs were weak and hunger gnawed at me. I chewed on one of the bars, but it barely helped. The forest felt endless now, like I was walking in circles no matter which way I turned. I scratched marks into tree trunks with my knife to track where I'd been. but sometimes I saw marks on trees I didn't remember passing. It made my stomach sink. By the third day, I was a mess. My beard had grown rough, my skin was scratched and bruised, and every step felt heavier. I drank from the stream whenever I could, but food was gone. I thought about trying to catch something, but I had nothing to trap with. Nothing sharp enough to spear. The thought of eating bugs crossed my mind more than once. That night I heard it again. Those heavy steps in the woods. Not close, but always circling, always staying just out of reach. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. I knew then I wasn't alone in those woods. The idea settled into me like ice. The fourth day blurred together. My mind started playing tricks on me. I thought I saw shapes moving between trees, but when I blinked, they were gone. My stomach cramped from hunger. My lips were split and bleeding. I stumbled often, catching myself on branches, dragging my feet. My knife felt heavier in my pocket, and I pulled it out more often, holding it in my hand even when I didn't need to. On the fifth day, I woke to find fresh prints near the clearing where I had slept. Not animal, boots. Someone had been there close while I slept. I stared at them, my head pounding with fear. They weren't mine. The ground was soft enough to make it clear. Deep heel marks, the tread of shoes that weren't my own. Whoever it was had walked right past me, close enough to see me lying there. I don't know why they didn't wake me or why they didn't speak. That fear gnawed at me worse than hunger. From then on, I felt hunted. Every sound, every shift of branches, every crunch of leaves made my heart race. I tried to move quieter, crouching, peering around trees before stepping forward. I stopped following the stream, afraid it would make me easy to track. I wanted to scream, to call out, but something deep in my gut told me not to. By the sixth night, I was hollowed out. I could barely keep the fire going. I heard steps again, closer now, circling. I tightened my grip on the knife and stared into the blackness. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I refused to close them. Every now and then I thought I saw a shadow shift against the tree line, but I couldn't be sure. On the seventh morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I forced myself to push forward, ignoring the pain in my legs. The forest seemed endless, but then, late in the afternoon, I saw something that made me freeze. A thin line between the trees, bright and unnatural. A road. I stumbled toward it, branches cutting into my arms, my lungs burning. I broke through the trees and collapsed onto the gravel. The heat of the asphalt felt unreal against my cheek. I lay there for what felt like hours, not caring who saw me, just breathing. Eventually, a car slowed, then stopped. I didn't look up at first. I heard a door open, footsteps on gravel. My body tensed. For a moment, I thought it might be whoever had been in the woods with me, but then a hand touched my shoulder, firm but careful. I turned my head and saw a stranger's face, concerned, asking questions I couldn't answer. They helped me into their car, gave me water, and drove me out of those woods. I never found out who had been out there with me, why they hadn't helped or why they watched. But I know this, something about those days changed me. I can't hear branches snap or see tree lines without feeling that old fear rising in me. The woods are never empty, and I will never walk into them alone again. I had gone into the woods more times than I could count, but I had never felt fear the way I did that day. At first, it was supposed to be nothing more than a long walk to clear my head. I had taken a small backpack, a bottle of water, a few snacks, and my phone. I had left my car at the small dirt lot by the trailhead, thinking I would loop back around in a few hours. The weather was clear, the air cool, and the woods seemed calm enough that morning. There was no reason to believe anything would go wrong. I followed the marked path for the first few miles, enjoying the sound of leaves crunching under my boots. The woods were thick but beautiful. Shafts of light cut down through the tall trees, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. The trail had enough twists and bends to feel like I was far away from the world, though in truth I wasn't more than an hour from the nearest town. The longer I walked, the more relaxed I felt, like the pressure of everything outside the forest had slipped away. I walked until my legs felt warm from the effort, and then I decided I didn't want to head back just yet. There was a point where the path forked, one part continuing along the marked trail and another leading off toward a narrow game trail. I had always been curious about these unmarked trails. I told myself I would just follow it for a short distance and then return. But as soon as I stepped off the main path, everything felt different. The woods closed in tighter, and the ground was rougher with roots and loose stones. Still, I kept going, convincing myself I'd recognize enough landmarks to turn back easily. For the first hour, I wasn't worried. The game trail was faint, but I could still follow it. I saw deer tracks pressed into the dirt and occasional broken branches that told me animals had used the same way. The deeper I went, the more silent it became. The bird song faded, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I stopped once to drink from my water bottle, noticing how far I had come, how the forest seemed endless around me. It was when I decided to turn back that I realized my mistake. I followed what I thought was the way I had come, but within 20 minutes I found myself circling back to the same fallen tree. I tried again, this time angling more to the right, but soon the faint trail vanished beneath thick undergrowth. I looked around and couldn't find the main path at all. Everything looked the same. Trunks, brush, the same filtered light. My chest tightened as I realized I had no clear idea where I was. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The battery wasn't full either. I put it back in my pocket, telling myself I wasn't far from the trail, that all I needed was to walk in one direction long enough. I picked a straight line and started moving, breaking branches behind me to mark where I had been. But the woods weren't easy to move through. The ground sloped unevenly, dropping into gullies and climbing again into ridges. Each ridge I climbed, I thought I'd see some sign of the trail or even hear the faint noise of cars from the road near the lot. But there was nothing. Just trees and more trees. As hours passed, my confidence faded. I checked my watch. It was past 3 in the afternoon. I had been walking since morning, and my water bottle was nearly empty. I ate half a granola bar, chewing slowly, trying not to think about how little I had with me. The woods seemed darker already, the light shifting as the sun moved lower. I decided to stop and rest, sitting on a log, listening to the stillness. That was when I realized how alone I was. I hadn't seen another person since leaving the trail. I tried to slow my breathing, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself to keep moving before it got dark. I walked until my legs shook with exhaustion. By the time the sun started sinking, I knew I wouldn't make it out before nightfall. I found a patch of ground between 2 large trees and dropped my pack down. I had no tent, no blanket, just the clothes I wore. The cold came quickly. My thin jacket wasn't enough, and soon I was shivering. I pulled my knees to my chest, listening to the distant cracking of branches. Every sound felt sharp in the silence. I knew animals lived in these woods, bears, coyotes, maybe worse. My small pocket knife suddenly felt useless. The night dragged on without sleep. My eyes kept snapping open every few minutes at the slightest rustle. I thought about home, about how easy it had been to leave my car behind without a thought. Now it felt like it belonged to another world. At some point, exhaustion pulled me into shallow sleep, but it wasn't restful. When the gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, I felt weak and stiff. My throat was dry, my bottle empty. My stomach ached from hunger. I stood, brushing dirt from my clothes, and started walking again. I kept the sun to my right, hoping that if I followed one direction long enough, I would hit a road or trail. By midday, my legs ached, and my lips were cracked. I stumbled more than once over roots. My hunger turned into a sharp pain, then into a dull emptiness. I thought about eating berries, but I didn't trust myself to tell the safe ones from the deadly. At one point, I found a stream. I dropped to my knees, cupping water in my hands, drinking until I felt sick. The cold water filled my stomach, but it gave me strength to keep moving. The second night was worse than the first. The cold cut through my body, and every noise in the woods pressed into my chest like a weight. I could hear distant movement sometimes, something large breaking through underbrush, stopping, moving again. I stayed as still as possible, praying it would pass by. My mind raced with images of a bear coming into the small clearing where I sat. I gripped my pocket knife, but I knew it would mean nothing if something big wanted me. When dawn came again, I was weaker than before. My legs felt like lead, my mouth dry again despite drinking from the stream the day before. I walked slower, dragging myself forward. The woods seemed endless, like they swallowed every step I took. It was midday when I finally saw something different. Ahead, through the trees, I noticed a faint straight line, something too regular to be natural. I stumbled toward it, branches scratching at my arms. When I broke through the tree line, I saw it. An old dirt road, overgrown but clear enough to follow. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. I followed the road, not knowing where it led, but grateful for something man-made. My steps quickened even though my body begged me to stop. After what felt like hours, I heard it. The faint hum of a car engine somewhere ahead. I pushed myself harder until I saw the shimmer of asphalt where the dirt road met a small paved one. I stumbled out onto the pavement, my body shaking, my throat too dry to call out. Minutes later, a car appeared in the distance. I stepped into the middle of the road, raising my arms, forcing them to stop. The driver rolled down the window, eyes wide when they saw me. That was how I was pulled back into the world, out of the endless woods. I never told anyone how close I felt to breaking, how in those woods I had felt myself shrinking into nothing but fear and weakness. It had been only 2 nights, but it felt like a lifetime. Now every time I think of the forest, I don't think of the peace or beauty. I think of how easy it is to step off the path, how quickly the woods can take you in, and how hard it is to find your way out again. I had gone into the woods that morning with the idea of clearing my head. It wasn't supposed to be anything big. Just a short hike, a few hours away from everything, and then back home before dark. I didn't even pack much. A bottle of water, a snack bar, my phone with half a charge, and a small folding knife I sometimes carried on hikes. I wasn't dressed for anything extreme either. Just jeans, a t-shirt, and an old pair of boots that had already seen better days. I had looked at the trail map at the entrance, but I didn't bother taking a photo of it or grabbing the printed one from the box. I had done that trail before, at least part of it, so I figured I wouldn't need much help. That was my first mistake. The woods looked calm when I walked in. The trail was wide at the start, a beaten-down path of dirt and small stones that wound between tall pines. Sunlight came down in stripes through the branches. The air smelled sharp and clean, and I remember thinking it felt good to breathe that air instead of the stale air in my apartment. Birds chirped above me, small rustles in the brush every so often, nothing out of the ordinary. I walked for a while, steady pace, not thinking much about where I was heading. I just wanted to keep moving, to lose the noise in my head. After about an hour, the path started to narrow. The dirt was still visible underfoot, but roots tangled across it and bushes pressed in from the sides. I didn't think anything of it. Trails do that sometimes. I noticed some side paths too, faint ones leading off deeper into the woods, but I stayed on what I thought was the main one. I didn't realize then that I had already gone further than I should have. By midday, I was sweating. The air felt heavier, thicker. The trees grew closer together, taller, and the sunlight barely reached the ground anymore. I stopped once to drink from my bottle, then kept walking. At some point, I noticed the trail wasn't as clear. It forked, curved, then forked again. I wasn't paying enough attention to the direction I had come from. And that was my second mistake. I picked one of the forks and went on, but after a while I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in a long time. Usually they paint them on tree trunks, small colored blazes to show you're still on the right path. I hadn't seen one in maybe half an hour. I told myself it was fine, that I'd circle back if I needed to. But then I hit a patch of ground where the trail seemed to vanish altogether. Just dirt, leaves, and low plants, no clear way forward. I turned back to retrace my steps. Except the trail behind me didn't look right anymore either. It was there, but it split in ways I didn't remember. My stomach sank. I walked a little back and forth trying to find something familiar, but it all looked the same. Brown earth, fallen branches, dark green trees. The woods don't care where you think you're going. They all look the same if you aren't careful. I decided to pick a direction and walk straight. I thought if I did that, I would eventually hit a main trail or even the edge of the forest. I kept moving, but the land wasn't flat. It rolled up and down in small ridges, and every time I climbed one, I thought I'd see something. Maybe a clearing, a road, anything. But it was always just more trees. The farther I went, the denser the brush grew. Branches scratched at my arms. Spiderwebs clung to my face. The woods grew silent in a way that didn't feel natural. No birds anymore, no rustles in the undergrowth, just the sound of my boots on the ground and my own breathing. By late afternoon, I was sure I was lost. My water bottle was almost empty. I tried using my phone, but the signal bars were gone. No service at all. The battery was draining too fast, so I turned it off, thinking I might need the flashlight later. The thought of being in those woods after dark made my chest tighten. I pushed on, but the light started to fade quicker than I expected. The canopy overhead blocked most of the sun. The woods turned from green to gray, then darker still. I found a fallen tree and sat for a while trying to think. My legs ached and my throat was dry. I ate half of the snack bar, saving the rest in case I needed it. Sitting there, I realized how deep the silence had gotten, the kind of silence where your own heartbeat feels loud. When night finally came, it wasn't gradual. One moment I could still see shapes of trees, and the next it was like a heavy curtain had been pulled over everything. I used my phone flashlight for a while, but it only lit a small circle around me, and beyond that circle was nothing but black. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves under my boots, the snap of a twig, even the whistle of wind between branches. I felt like something was always just outside the light, watching, though I knew it was just my nerves. I decided to stop moving for the night. It was too easy to trip in the dark, and I didn't want to break an ankle out there. I cleared a small space near a tree, brushing away leaves and sticks. I sat with my back against the trunk, hugging my knees, trying not to think about how alone I really was. The woods at night are not quiet like a room. They breathe. Distant cracks, faint howls far off, the rush of something small darting through the brush. Every noise set me on edge. My knife felt tiny in my pocket, useless if anything larger than a raccoon came too close. I didn't sleep much. My eyes kept closing, but every sound jerked me awake again. Hours dragged by. At one point, I thought I heard heavy steps, not animal quick, but steady. Weighty, like someone walking. They faded before I could be sure, but my chest pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I stayed frozen, clutching the knife, waiting, but nothing came. When dawn finally lit the trees in pale gray, I felt half dead with exhaustion. The morning gave me a little courage again. I turned my phone on long enough to check the time. It was just after 6, and then off again to save power. I chewed the rest of the snack bar and forced myself to keep walking. My mouth was dry and I knew I needed water soon. I listened for the sound of running water, and after hours of trudging, I finally found a small stream. The relief almost made me cry. I knelt and drank straight from it, not caring about anything else. The water was cold, metallic, but it kept me going. I followed the stream, thinking it would lead me to a river or a road. For a while it worked. The woods grew lighter, the trees spaced farther apart. I thought maybe I was heading the right way. But then the stream twisted into marshy ground. Mud sucked at my boots and insects swarmed my face. The smell of wet rot filled the air. I had to leave the stream and climb back to higher ground. The second day dragged on endlessly. My legs felt heavier with every step. Hunger gnawed at me. I tried to keep my mind clear, to focus on practical things, but fear seeped into every thought. What if I never found my way out? What if I collapsed and no one ever found me? I started to mark trees with my knife, small cuts in the bark, so I'd know if I circled back. I realized after a while that I had already crossed one of my own marks. I had been walking in circles. Panic hit me hard then. My chest tightened and I stumbled to the ground. I forced myself to breathe, to slow down, but my mind kept racing. I couldn't think straight. The woods pressed in around me like walls. I wanted to scream, but I knew that would waste energy. That night was worse than the first. I had no food left, only water from the stream I had filled a bottle with. My stomach ached, twisting and empty. I tried to sleep again, but the cold seeped into my bones. I shivered so hard my teeth clacked. I thought about how stupid it was, going in unprepared, thinking I could just walk it off. The woods don't forgive mistakes. On the third day, I felt weaker. My steps dragged. My lips were cracked, my throat sore. I tried to keep following what I thought was east, but I had no compass, no real sense of direction. The sun moved above me, but with the canopy so thick I could barely see it. By midday, I was stumbling more than walking. My vision blurred. At one point, I fell and didn't get up right away. I lay there, face pressed into the dirt, smelling the earth, thinking maybe I should just stay down. But something inside me pushed me back to my feet. I kept moving, one step after another, even though every muscle in my body screamed at me to stop. Late in the afternoon, I finally heard something that didn't belong to the woods. A low hum. Faint at first, then stronger. I froze, straining to listen. It sounded mechanical, distant, like cars on a road. My heart leapt. I staggered toward it, tripping over roots, crashing through brush. The sound grew louder until I saw a break in the trees ahead. Light spilled through. I pushed forward and burst out of the woods onto the edge of a road. Asphalt stretched in both directions, hot under the sun. The hum I'd heard was a car that passed moments later. I stood there on shaky legs, staring, hardly believing it. My clothes were torn, my hands filthy, my face streaked with sweat and dirt. But I was out. I knew then how close I had come to not making it. Another day, maybe two, and I might have collapsed for good. The woods had swallowed me whole and nearly kept me, all because I thought I knew better. Thought I could handle it without being prepared. As I stood on that roadside, I promised myself I'd never forget how quickly it had all turned. The woods aren't a place to take lightly. They don't need ghosts or monsters to be terrifying. They're enough on their own. I set out into the woods that morning with nothing more than a backpack, a map, and the confidence I had built up over years of short hikes and weekend camping trips. I wasn't a professional outdoorsman, not even close, but I had always felt at ease among trees and quiet trails. The forest had a way of shutting out the noise of everything else, and I wanted that silence more than anything. I wanted the steady rhythm of boots over dirt, the stillness of untouched land, the way the air smelled damp and earthy miles away from any road. The plan was simple. Hike a long loop that was marked on the old paper map I had printed. Spend one night out, then circle back the next day to where I left my car. It didn't seem like anything that could go wrong. I had food, water, a compass, extra batteries, and a decent sleeping bag. The route was supposed to be straightforward, but plans only stay simple until the woods decide otherwise. By noon, I had already lost the trail twice. At first, I thought it was nothing. The markers were faded, small rectangles of paint chipped off tree bark that blended into the colors around them. When you looked one way, you'd think you saw a mark, then realize it was just a scrap of lichen or a streak of sap. Both times I had wandered off. I caught the mistake quickly and doubled back, finding the faint footprints of others to reassure me I wasn't alone. But after the second time, a thought pushed into my head and didn't leave. If it was this easy to miss the trail while paying attention, what would happen when I got tired, or if it started to get dark? The trees here weren't thin or forgiving. They grew close together, their branches reaching across the sky like arms trying to knit the light shut. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the smell of soil and wet leaves. Every sound carried farther than it should have. My breathing, the shift of my pack against my back, the occasional snap of twigs under my boots. There was no background hum of traffic, no planes overhead, just the slow pulse of the forest. For a while I liked that. Then when I started thinking about how deep I was, how easy it would be to keep walking in the wrong direction, the quiet turned heavy. The third time I lost the trail, I couldn't find it again. It happened fast. The path forked, or at least it looked like it did, and I chose the right branch. 10 minutes later, the ground grew soft and marshy, and the faint prints I had been following disappeared into mud. I stopped, checked the map, and tried to line it up with my compass. But nothing looked right. The lines and marks on paper didn't match what stood in front of me. Trees had no names. Hills weren't drawn the way they felt under your boots. I turned around, walked back, and expected to see the fork. Instead, I saw more trees, all the same thickness, all bending slightly with the wind, all covered in the same damp moss. My stomach tightened, but I told myself to stay calm. I backtracked, then turned again. I thought I had gone too far one way, so I cut across in a diagonal. Within minutes, I had no sense of where I'd come from. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and clusters of thorny shrubs that forced me to detour. Every direction looked the same. My compass needle twitched and steadied, pointing north. But north meant nothing if I didn't know where the trail was. By the time I admitted I was lost, the sun had already begun sliding lower, throwing long shadows through the trees. The light changed quickly, that strange hour when gold turns to gray, and I felt it in my chest. Darkness wasn't hours away. It was creeping in, minute by minute, swallowing the colors of everything around me. I dropped my pack and pulled out the map again. I crouched on damp leaves, tracing the loop I was supposed to be on. I tried to measure the distance I had covered, guessing how far I'd walked since I had last been certain of my position. My hands were dirty, smudging the paper, and the more I looked, the less sense it made. Rivers and streams on the map weren't where I expected. Contours and ridges were too vague to match to what I was standing in. I folded it back up, shoved it away, and sat there for a long moment listening to the forest settle around me. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't calming. It was pressing in, reminding me that the world here didn't care about me or my plans. Something cracked in the distance, maybe a branch falling, maybe an animal moving, and I jerked my head toward the sound, heart hammering. The woods weren't empty. They never were. I knew what I had to do, make camp before it got too dark. Trying to stumble through the forest without a path in total blackness was asking to break an ankle or worse. I found a flat spot between two thick trees, cleared away loose sticks, and set up my small tent. My hands were unsteady as I worked the poles into place, my breathing uneven. The sound of nylon crinkling felt too loud, like it was announcing my position to whatever else might be out there. When the tent was up, I pulled out my food, protein bars, trail mix, a small packet of jerky. I chewed without tasting it, my jaw tight, my ears tuned to every sound beyond the thin fabric of the tent walls. The sun slipped out completely while I ate, and the cold crept in. I zipped myself inside, clicked on my flashlight, and studied the small circle of light on the fabric ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I drifted, something snapped me awake. The rustle of leaves, the call of a distant bird, the brush of wind that sounded too much like footsteps. My throat was dry no matter how much water I sipped. My body felt stiff, heavy, but my mind kept running. I thought about how far I might be from the trail, from my car, from another person. I thought about how people got lost in forests like this and didn't come out. I thought about how thin the walls of a tent really were. When morning finally came, the light was gray and weak, and I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I forced myself up, packed quickly, and decided to move east. If I kept one steady direction, I told myself, I had to hit something eventually. A road, a river, anything. The compass was clear, the needle steady, and I trusted it because I had nothing else. The woods didn't make it easy. Slopes rose and fell, pulling me off balance. Thickets forced me to weave back and forth. At times, the trees were so dense I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. My boots sank into patches of mud, pulling at my ankles. Hours passed like that. One slow step after another. The sun shifting overhead, the weight of my pack cutting into my shoulders. My stomach growled, and I stopped only long enough to eat more jerky before pushing on. By afternoon, my legs shook from the effort. My water was running low, the bottle lighter each time I raised it to my lips. Then I heard it, the faint trickle of water ahead. Relief surged through me, and I pushed toward it, breaking through undergrowth until I saw a narrow stream cutting through the forest floor. The water looked clean, fast enough to be fresh. I crouched and filled my bottle, letting it run clear before I drank. It was cold, sharp, and it steadied me. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead to something bigger, but streams twist and split. They cut paths that circle back, vanish into marsh, or disappear under fallen logs. I followed it for hours, but the land only grew rougher. My feet slipped on rocks. My shins ached from stumbling. When the light began to fade again, the panic I had kept pressed down rose up hard. Another night alone, deeper in than before. I made camp again, this time closer to the water. I tried to build a fire with the small kit I had, but the wood was damp, stubborn, refusing to catch. I managed a weak flame that smoked more than it burned, and I sat by it, knees pulled up, feeling the heat fade each time the fire coughed down to embers. The forest at night was alive, small movements, distant calls, things slipping between shadows. My skin prickled with every sound, and my imagination twisted each one into something bigger, closer, watching. The second night was worse than the first. My stomach was empty by morning, my food nearly gone. My head pounded from thirst even though I had water. My legs cramped when I tried to stand. I pressed forward anyway, dragging myself east, always east, the compass my only anchor. The third day blurred. My lips were cracked, my voice gone from disuse. My arms shook when I lifted the pack. The trees blurred together. Once I thought I saw a clearing ahead, light spilling down into open grass, but when I reached it, it was only another slope dropping into thicker woods. My knees buckled and I sat there in the dirt, chest heaving, sweat cold on my back. It was the fourth morning, I think, when I heard the hum. Faint at first, so faint I thought I imagined it, then stronger, the low, steady drone of an engine. I staggered toward it, heart pounding, pushing through trees until I saw a strip of dirt road, pale and real, cutting through the forest. I stumbled onto it, falling to my knees, laughing a sound that broke in my throat. Minutes later, a truck rounded the bend and the driver braked hard at the sight of me. His eyes went wide, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him over the rush of my own blood in my ears. He opened the door, and I climbed in, shaking so hard I couldn't hold myself steady. I had made it out. Barely. My body was weak, my mind frayed, but the road was real and it led me away from the trees that had almost swallowed me whole. The forest hadn't cared whether I lived or not. It had only stood there, endless and indifferent, while I fought my way back to the edge and Eve. I didn't think much of the woods when I first entered them. I had been hiking before, camping too, and I thought this trip would be no different. The air was cool, the trees stood close together but not too tight, and the ground felt firm under my boots. I parked my car off a gravel road near a small pull-off and shouldered my pack, telling myself I'd only be gone for a few hours. I wanted to clear my head, maybe take some photos and come back before it got dark. At first it went as planned. The trail looked clear enough, a narrow dirt line cut between tall grass and thin pines. The sound of birds came and went. Insects buzzed. I could hear wind moving through the branches above. For the first hour, I kept checking my phone to see the time, making sure I didn't push it too far. I had water, a couple of granola bars, a flashlight, and a jacket. Enough for the day, but somewhere along the way I stopped paying attention. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. Maybe I followed a deer path without realizing it. Maybe I drifted left when the trail curved right. The forest didn't look all that different in any direction. Trees repeated themselves, shapes and colors blending. After a while, I noticed the dirt path under my feet didn't look as worn. I kept going, telling myself it would loop back. Minutes stretched into longer stretches, and when I finally stopped and looked around, I realized I couldn't see anything resembling a trail at all. Just trees, brush, and uneven ground in every direction. My chest felt tight. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I turned around, thinking I'd just walk back the way I came, but the woods swallowed the memory of the trail. Every direction looked the same. I told myself not to panic. People got turned around all the time. I had water. I had daylight left. All I had to do was pick a direction and stick to it until I crossed the trail again. I chose the way I thought I had come from and started walking. The ground dipped and climbed, roots catching my boots, thorns scratching at my legs. I walked harder, faster, until I was sweating through my shirt. After half an hour, I stopped again. Nothing looked familiar. I saw no footprints, no broken branches that looked like mine. Just endless woods. I drank some water and tried to calm down. I remembered hearing once that if you're lost, you should stop moving and stay in one place. Someone could find you easier that way, but nobody even knew exactly where I had gone. I hadn't told anyone the name of the pull-off or the spot I parked. If I sat down and waited, it might be days before someone happened to come through. So I kept walking. The hours stretched out. The light changed. Shadows grew longer. My legs started to ache. I finished one of my granola bars, but it did little to ease the hollow feeling in my stomach. My throat felt dry. I kept sipping at the water, trying not to drink too much. By the time the sun started dropping behind the trees, I still hadn't found a trail, road, or any sign of people. The woods grew darker fast and the air cooled. I pulled on my jacket and forced myself to keep moving. My mind kept circling around the same thought. I was completely alone and I didn't know which way was out. When night fully set in, I turned on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness in a narrow cone, lighting up trunks, branches, and undergrowth. The sound of the forest shifted. Insects screamed louder. Small animals scurried in the brush. Every sound felt sharper, closer. I tried to ignore the way my heartbeat quickened whenever something cracked in the distance. I didn't want to walk in the dark, but I couldn't bring myself to just sit on the cold ground and wait. I told myself I'd keep going until I found water, maybe a creek. Following water usually led to people, so I kept the beam of the flashlight moving, searching for dips in the land. After hours, I stumbled across a low area where the ground was damp. The beam caught glints of water pooled in spots, reflecting faintly. I followed it, and sure enough, I found a trickle of running water, a narrow stream cutting through the dirt. Relief washed over me. At least I had a direction now. Streams went somewhere. I crouched down, filled my bottle, and drank carefully, ignoring the earthy taste. I followed that stream through the night. The ground was rough, tangled with roots, and more than once I slipped into the mud. My jeans were soaked to the knees. My flashlight dimmed as the batteries weakened, the beam growing faint. My body ached everywhere, but I didn't stop. I told myself I'd rest when the sun came back up. When morning came, I was dragging myself forward on sore legs. My throat burned. My stomach ached from hunger. I had eaten the last granola bar hours earlier. The stream twisted endlessly, never widening, never meeting another body of water. Just the same trickle over rocks and mud. I felt weaker as the day went on. I tried chewing leaves just to quiet the hollow in my gut, but it didn't help. My head felt heavy, my thoughts slow. The woods pressed in closer, darker, even in daylight. On the second night, I tried to build a small fire with what little dry wood I could find, but everything felt damp, and I couldn't get it going. I huddled under my jacket, shivering, listening to the forest move around me. Branches cracked somewhere in the dark. I heard heavy rustling once, too loud to be a rabbit or raccoon. I pressed my back against a tree, clutching the flashlight, afraid of whatever might be out there. When dawn broke, I forced myself back up and followed the stream again. My legs barely held me. My lips felt cracked. My stomach cramped so bad I had to stop and curl up for a while. At some point, I realized I wasn't even sure if I was following the same stream anymore. There were forks I didn't remember, splits that led off into different directions. I picked one and went with it, but doubt gnawed at me. Maybe I had chosen wrong. Maybe I was just circling. Days blurred together. My sense of time broke apart. Sometimes I walked under the sun until I nearly collapsed. Sometimes I woke in the dark, freezing, unsure how long I had slept. The forest didn't care. It stayed the same in every direction. Endless, heavy quiet except for the sounds of animals I couldn't see. The hunger grew unbearable. My body shook with it. My mind played tricks on me. I thought I saw a clearing once, open ground ahead, but when I reached it, it was just more trees. Another time I thought I heard the faint hum of a car engine, but it was only wind moving through branches. I tried eating berries I found, but most tasted bitter and I spat them out, afraid of poisoning myself. I caught sight of a squirrel once, and in my desperation I threw a rock at it, but it darted away. I cursed under my breath, weak and shaking. Nights were the worst. Cold sank deep into my bones. I curled up against tree trunks, unable to sleep more than a few minutes at a time. Every crack of branches made my heart lurch. My flashlight finally died, leaving me in total darkness. I kept it in my pocket anyway, as if holding on to it gave me some control. By what I guessed was the 5th or 6th day, I could barely move. My legs trembled with each step. My vision swam. I no longer cared which way I went. I just dragged myself forward, 1 foot at a time, gripping trees to stay upright. Then, as I pushed through another patch of thick brush, I saw it. A dirt road. Not a trail, not an animal path, but a real road, pressed down by tires, stretching out through the trees. My chest tightened. For a moment I thought it was another trick of my mind, but when I stumbled closer, the ground was real. Compacted earth and faint tire tracks cut across it. I dropped to my knees, breathing hard. Relief hit so strong I nearly cried. I pushed myself up and followed the road, every step fueled by desperate hope. I didn't know where it led, but it didn't matter. Roads always led somewhere. After what felt like hours of dragging myself along it, I saw movement in the distance. A shape. At first I thought it was another hallucination, but then I made out the outline of a truck parked on the side. My body shook with exhaustion and relief as I stumbled forward. When I reached it, the truck was empty, but the sight of it was enough. It meant people came here. It meant I wasn't completely lost anymore. I sat down beside it, leaning against the metal, too weak to keep going, but knowing that if I waited long enough, someone would come back. I closed my eyes, my chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. I had been lost for days, starving, cold, and terrified, but I had found my way out not by skill or planning, but by sheer luck and the will to keep moving. The woods hadn't killed me. Not yet, and that was enough. I hadn't planned on being out in the woods that long. At first, it was supposed to be a simple hike. Nothing more than a day trip to clear my head, stretch my legs, and spend some hours away from the noise of my usual life. I had packed light, just a backpack with a bottle of water, a few granola bars, a folded map I barely looked at, and a thin jacket. I wasn't dressed for cold nights, and I certainly wasn't prepared for an accident, but I told myself it wouldn't matter. The trail wasn't supposed to be difficult. The sun was out when I started, the air fresh and calm, the forest floor soft beneath my boots. It felt safe. The trail wound through tall trees, the kind that block out the sky in places and make you feel like you've stepped inside a green, endless tunnel. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The hum of cars faded, the voices of people vanished. Even the sound of distant chainsaws or farm equipment grew faint until all that remained was the creak of branches and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I loved that silence. At first, I had walked for hours when I noticed something I couldn't shake. The trail markers had stopped appearing. Normally there would be small paint marks on the trees or wooden posts at crossings, but I realized I hadn't seen one in some time. I wasn't worried yet. The ground was still beaten down enough to suggest people used it. But as I kept moving forward, the path began to narrow, fading into patches of moss and roots until it barely looked like a trail at all. I should have turned back then. I should have retraced my steps, but the forest had a way of playing tricks. Looking behind me, the way back looked less familiar than I expected. It was as if the trees had shifted while I wasn't looking, their trunks crowding tighter, their shapes blurring into each other. I told myself it was just my nerves. I had a map after all, and daylight left, I pushed on, thinking I'd reconnect with the main trail soon enough. But the forest didn't give me that. The ground grew uneven, full of hidden dips and sharp rocks beneath the leaves. I tripped more than once, catching myself on my hands. My palms stung and dirt caked into the small cuts. The sun had begun to slide lower, bleeding golden light through the gaps in the trees, stretching the shadows longer. That was when I first admitted to myself that I might be lost. I took out the map. It was useless. A flat piece of paper that showed neat black lines and shaded areas for forest cover. But out here, standing alone among endless trees, there was no reference point. No signs, no clearings. Nothing but trunks and branches that all looked the same. I folded the map back into my pocket, suddenly feeling its weight like a mockery. My water bottle was already half empty, and I caught myself drinking more than I should with each sip. My throat was dry from breathing heavy. I tried to steady myself, but the quiet had changed. It was no longer peaceful. Now it pressed against me, thick and heavy, broken only by small sounds I couldn't place. A snap of twigs somewhere off to the side, a rustle in the underbrush, the quick flutter of wings above. Each time I stopped walking, the forest seemed to breathe around me. My heart beat louder than it should have. I told myself to stay calm. People get lost in woods and get found all the time. The trick was to move smart, not panic. I tried to walk in a straight line, keeping the setting sun to my left as a reference. My plan was to keep moving in one direction until I hit a road or clearing. The problem was, the terrain didn't care about my plan. The ground dipped into gullies, climbed into ridges, twisted me around obstacles I couldn't climb over. I would circle trees the size of buildings, lose my bearings, and look up to find the sun already shifting out of sight. Clouds rolled in too, gray and heavy, covering what little guidance I had. When the first drops of rain hit, I stopped. The forest went dark quickly after that. Not a sudden pitch black, but a slow drowning of light until I was standing in a blur of wet bark and shadow. I tried to keep moving, but every step grew dangerous. The ground was slick, and I slipped hard once. sliding down a muddy slope and slamming my knee into a rock. Pain shot up my leg. I sat there in the muck, gripping my knee, teeth clenched, trying not to panic. The rain kept falling, cold and steady, soaking my jacket until it clung to me. I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was there in front of me. I wasn't going to find my way out that night. I was stuck. I chose a spot under a cluster of thick trees where the branches caught some of the rain before it hit the ground. The earth there was damp but not flooded. I cleared away leaves with my boots and sat down. My legs ached, my stomach twisted with hunger, and my clothes clung cold against my skin. I chewed one of the granola bars slowly, every bite tasting like cardboard, but I needed the energy. The water bottle felt dangerously light now, so I didn't drink much. The forest at night was different. The sounds changed. No longer the distant chirps and calls of daybirds, but sharper, closer noises. The scrape of something moving in the brush. The crack of a branch snapping under weight. I couldn't see far, the darkness pressing against my eyes, so every sound felt amplified. I sat still, heart hammering, straining to hear. Most of the time it was small things. Maybe rabbits, maybe raccoons. But a few times I was sure it was heavier, slower, moving with purpose. I pressed my back against the tree and tried not to breathe too loud. Sleep never came. When the sky finally began to lighten, it wasn't relief that came first, but dread. I looked around at the endless trunks and realized I was no closer to escaping than before. My body ached all over, my knee swollen from the fall. My stomach growled. My lips were cracked and dry, but I stood, forced myself to keep going. Day after day followed like that. Wandering in circles, trying to use the sun as a guide, but always thrown off by the terrain. My water ran out the second day, and I was forced to drink from a stream I found. The water tasted earthy, metallic, but it was cold and it kept me alive. My hunger sharpened until I thought of nothing else. The granola bars had been gone quickly, and all I had were a few berries I recognized as safe. They barely filled me. The woods wore me down piece by piece. My shoes soaked through from mud. My hands blistered from grabbing at rocks and trees. My skin burned with insect bites. Each night the noises grew louder, or maybe I was just weaker, more afraid. Once I heard something crashing through the brush not far off, heavy and fast. I crouched low, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and waited until silence returned. The fear wasn't only of animals. It was of myself, my own mind. I began to doubt every step, second-guessing my sense of direction, wondering if I had walked past the same tree a dozen times. My throat ached from thirst, my stomach twisted in knots of pain, and my thoughts began to splinter. On the fourth day, I nearly gave up. I sat on a fallen log, head in my hands, too weak to cry. The idea of never leaving those woods settled over me like a weight. I thought about people finding nothing but scraps of my clothes months later. Thought about my body sinking into the moss, disappearing into roots and soil. But then, faintly, I heard something. It wasn't the random noise of the forest. It was rhythmic, distant but steady. At first I thought it was in my head, but then it grew clearer. A mechanical thump, faint but unmistakable. My brain clawed through the fog until I recognized it. Chopping, an axe on wood. I staggered to my feet, adrenaline shoving me forward. I followed the sound, pushing through brush, scraping my arms on thorns, ignoring the pain in my knee. The noise came and went, faint and then stronger, like the forest itself tried to smother it. At last I stumbled into a thin trail. Not a wide one, not marked, but beaten enough to show human use. My chest tightened with hope and fear. I followed it, nearly tripping with each step until the trees opened into a small clearing. There, set back among stumps and wood piles, was a cabin. Smoke curled faintly from a metal chimney. The sight nearly dropped me to my knees. I staggered to the clearing's edge, too weak to shout. My body trembled, my lips cracked, and I must have looked half dead. But someone stepped out from the cabin, an older man in worn clothes carrying an axe. He froze when he saw me, surprise clear on his face, but then he set the axe down and came closer. Relief hit me so hard it was almost painful. I wasn't alone anymore. He helped me inside, gave me water, food, and a place to rest. My hands shook as I ate, my throat raw as I swallowed. Warmth seeped back into my body, though the terror of the woods lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. I had been lost for 5 days. 5 days of wandering in circles, of hunger, thirst, pain, and the constant press of fear in the dark. When I was finally taken out of the woods and back to safety, I promised myself something. I would never again treat the forest lightly. It wasn't just trees and trails. It was endless, merciless, and patient, and if you weren't careful, it would take everything from you. Your strength, your mind, your hope, until there was nothing left. I survived, but only just. And even now, long after, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear it. The rustle in the brush, the snap of a branch, the sound of something moving just out of sight, waiting for me to stumble again. I didn't mean to wander as far as I did. I had gone into the woods thinking it would be simple. A walk, maybe a short hike just to clear my head for a while. It wasn't even planned. I was driving back from a small town when I noticed a trailhead sign, half covered in moss, pointing toward a narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees. I pulled over without really thinking and stepped out with nothing but a bottle of water, my jacket, and the phone in my pocket. The air was cool and heavy with the smell of damp leaves. The forest stretched in all directions, thick and quiet, the kind of place where sound feels like it gets swallowed whole. I stepped onto the path, and for the first few minutes it was easy. Packed dirt, some rocks, a scattering of pine needles. Birds shifted above me, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere deeper. The trail wasn't marked well, but I figured it would loop back across another one. That's usually how trails worked. I didn't even notice when the path faded. It was gradual. The ground seemed to flatten out. Leaves covered the dirt, and I found myself walking without really paying attention. By the time I realized there weren't any signs of a trail anymore, I had already been heading downhill through a patch of dense brush. I turned back, expecting to see where I had come from, but everything looked the same. Brown trunks, gray bark, green ferns reaching up from the forest floor. I told myself not to panic. I'd just retrace my steps. I walked back the way I thought I came, keeping the slope behind me. But the woods shifted around me in a way that made every direction blend together. I couldn't tell where I had first stepped off. My footprints didn't stick in the leaf litter, and the ground was uneven, full of small dips and rises. Within minutes I was turning in circles, unsure if I was undoing my steps or only getting deeper. The air grew heavier, like the clouds had thickened above the canopy. Light dimmed, though it wasn't late. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The battery icon was already lower than I expected, probably because I had been using maps earlier in the day. I put it back in my pocket and tried to steady my breathing. I walked. I thought if I just kept moving in one steady direction, I'd hit something eventually. A road, another trail, a stream I could follow. The forest floor grew softer, damp beneath the thick carpet of moss. My shoes made a muted squish with every step. Branches clawed at my jacket, snagging the fabric, leaving tiny threads behind. The woods were tighter here. The trees pressed close, and I had to squeeze through narrow gaps. Hours slipped by without me realizing. I only noticed when I felt hunger in my stomach and dryness in my mouth. I finished half my water bottle in one gulp, trying to ration the rest but already regretting not bringing more. My legs felt heavier, my knees stiff from climbing over fallen logs and ducking under tangled limbs. The thought crept in slowly that I wasn't just a little lost. I was truly out here in the middle of nowhere, and no one knew I had stopped. My car was parked by the road, but I hadn't told anyone I was going to take this walk. As afternoon turned to evening, the forest darkened into something else entirely. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the shapes of trees twisted into looming walls. The noise of birds died off, replaced by the faint hum of insects. Every now and then I heard something heavier move through the brush, something with weight behind it. A deer maybe, or something else. Each sound made me freeze, heart pounding, scanning the trees for movement. But the woods always went still again before I caught a glimpse. I kept pushing forward, stumbling now. The ground dipped sharply and I slid down a slick slope of leaves into a hollow that smelled like rot. My hands hit damp soil, cold and wet, and I had to claw my way back up to firmer ground. My jacket was smeared with mud, my palms gritty. I wiped them on my pants and pressed on. By the time true darkness settled in, I realized I had made a mistake not stopping earlier to prepare some kind of camp. I had no light except my phone, which I didn't want to waste. The forest swallowed everything around me into blackness, the kind where you can't see your own hand without some kind of glow. The noises got louder too, branches cracking, rustling steps, high-pitched whines of insects. I found a patch of ground between two thick trees and sat down, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The cold seeped in almost immediately. I tried to close my eyes, but every sound snapped me awake again. Something moving through leaves. Something stepping on twigs. My mind went to every possible animal. Bears, coyotes, wild dogs, but each noise came without a shape. I imagined eyes watching me from the dark. My back ached against the rough bark, my legs cramping, but I didn't move much. I was afraid of making noise. The night dragged endlessly. My stomach knotted with hunger, and my throat burned with thirst. I sipped the last of my water, knowing it wouldn't be enough. My phone was at 25%, and I didn't want to risk draining it just for the flashlight. I had to save it for when I really needed it. When the first pale light finally seeped through the trees, I forced myself up, shivering. My muscles ached, stiff from sitting against the tree all night, but I started walking again. I had no sense of direction anymore. I tried to follow where the light looked brightest, thinking it might mean an opening, but it only led me deeper. The forest floor turned to marsh in places, my shoes sinking into black mud that smelled sharp like rotting plants. Each step was harder to pull free. At one point, I stumbled into what looked like an old hunting stand. The wooden frame leaned against a tree, rotted through, half collapsed. A broken ladder clung to its side. It gave me a brief surge of hope. Someone had been here before, but the wood was brittle and gray, abandoned for years. Moss covered the planks. I searched the ground nearby, hoping for some kind of trail or sign, but there was nothing. Just more forest hours stretched. The sun climbed, but the trees kept most of its light out, leaving everything in dull shadow. My lips were dry and my tongue felt heavy. I looked for water, any sign of a stream, but the ground was only wet in patches. No flowing sound, no clear surface. My head started to ache from thirst. By the second night, I was weak. My legs trembled under me, and each step felt like dragging weight through mud. I collapsed more than once, catching myself on branches, skinning my palms raw. I found another spot between roots and sat again, curled into myself, shaking from cold. The noises came back, louder than before. I heard something large moving, close enough that I could hear its breath pushing through leaves. I held my breath, staying completely still. The steps circled near me, crunching leaves, then moved away again. I didn't sleep. My mind spun with thoughts of rescue, of people driving past my car without knowing where I was. I thought of how no one even knew I was here, and how I might never get out. The third day, I was barely walking. My throat felt raw, my lips cracked. When I finally stumbled onto a trickle of water sliding down a small incline, I dropped to my knees and pressed my mouth against it. The taste was metallic and dirty, but I drank anyway, choking on the grit. It gave me just enough strength to keep moving. By then, I wasn't even sure what direction I was going. The trees all looked the same, endless rows of trunks and brush. My thoughts grew slower, my legs moving on their own. I stopped noticing the sounds around me, too focused on dragging myself forward. Late in the afternoon, I broke into a clearing. The sudden open space made me blink in shock. Tall grass stretched before me, flattened in places, and beyond it I saw the faint line of something straight and unnatural. I pushed through, stumbling, and when I reached the other side, I almost cried. It was a road. A cracked, narrow asphalt road, but real, cutting through the forest. I collapsed onto the shoulder, the rough gravel digging into my skin, but I didn't care. I had found it. I had made it back. I lay there for a long time, chest heaving, before I forced myself to sit up. My legs shook, and I used the last bit of my phone battery to check for service. A single bar blinked to life. I typed out a message with shaking hands, sending my location before the phone died completely. I stayed there on the edge of the road until headlights appeared, hours later growing brighter as a car slowed to a stop. Relief hit me so hard I almost passed out right there. I had survived, but the forest had swallowed 2 full days of my life. I had gone in thinking it was just a walk. I came out knowing how close I had been to disappearing completely, lost among the trees where no one would ever find me. I told myself it would just be a short hike. The kind where you walk a couple of miles, enjoy the quiet of the trees, breathe some fresh air, and then circle back to the trailhead before it gets dark. That was the plan. It was supposed to be easy, but I underestimated how quickly things could fall apart when you're alone in the woods. The morning started calm. The sky was pale blue, thin clouds stretching across it like pulled cotton. The air had a slight bite to it, the leftover chill of night clinging to the trees. The forest was wide and quiet, and the path I followed seemed clear enough. The ground was damp with dew. Soft soil pressed down under my boots. Birds flickered between branches, their calls echoing faintly. At first I felt lucky to be out there, away from everything. I carried only a small backpack, a bottle of water, a couple of granola bars, and a cheap flashlight I had thrown in without much thought. No map, no compass, no real gear. I didn't think I would need any of it. The trail looked straightforward, and I had always thought of myself as someone with a decent sense of direction. For the first hour, the walk was perfect. The air smelled clean like pine and wet earth. Shafts of sunlight broke through the leaves overhead, dust drifting in them like sparks. The quiet was heavy but not threatening, more like a blanket. My mind wandered as I walked. I wasn't even paying much attention to where my feet were going. That was the first mistake. I noticed the trail thinning out, the dirt blending with roots and patches of grass. At first, I assumed it was just part of the loop. Trails do that sometimes, narrowing and widening again. I kept going. The trees grew thicker, the canopy above darker, cutting the light into fractured patches. I started to realize I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while. My chest tightened a little, but I told myself it was fine. I'd just gone a little further than planned. Then the path disappeared altogether. One moment I was following faint dirt. The next I was standing in a mess of undergrowth, thorny vines pulling at my jeans. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pick out which way I had come from. Every direction looked the same, trunks, branches, shadows. For a moment I hesitated, and that hesitation dug its claws into me. I tried retracing my steps. I thought if I just turned back the way I'd come, I'd find the packed dirt again. But after 5 minutes of walking, I couldn't find anything familiar. My own footprints weren't visible in the damp soil, and the woods seemed to close in tighter the more I moved. That was when I felt the first jolt of panic. It started in my stomach, spreading cold through my chest. My heartbeat was too loud, too fast. I stopped and forced myself to breathe. Getting worked up wasn't going to help. I pulled out my water bottle, took a sip, and looked around slowly. I told myself I wasn't lost, I just needed to find a landmark, something to orient myself. But the deeper I went, the more everything blurred into sameness. Trees so close together I had to squeeze through. Low branches clawing at my shoulders, thorns scratching my arms. The ground was uneven with hidden dips that twisted my ankles when I stepped wrong. I tried to keep the sun as my guide, but the canopy made it impossible to tell where it was most of the time. I felt trapped in a green cage. Hours must have passed like that. My legs ached and sweat soaked the back of my shirt. I kept moving, thinking any second I'd stumble back onto the trail or hear the sound of a road in the distance. But the forest swallowed every noise. It was just me, the crunch of my boots, the thud of my heart. When I stopped to rest, I realized how silent it really was. The birds were gone. Even the faint buzz of insects seemed muted. I sat on a fallen log chewing half a granola bar. My mouth was dry even though I still had water. That silence pressed down harder than anything else. It felt unnatural, like the woods were holding their breath, listening. As I sat there, I heard something. It was faint, a rustle in the brush. My head snapped toward it, but I saw nothing. A squirrel, maybe, or the wind. I told myself not to jump at every noise. But a few minutes later, I heard it again. Not a quick scurry, slower, heavier, like footsteps. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned in a full circle, eyes darting between the trees. Nothing moved. No figure, no animal, just empty woods. I told myself it was paranoia. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and the quiet was playing tricks on me. I stood up and started walking again, a little faster this time. Every so often, though, I thought I heard it again, something behind me, just out of sync with my own steps. I would stop and it would stop. I strained my ears until they hurt, but silence would stretch out thick and heavy until I forced myself to keep going. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows grew long and dark. That was when real fear set in. I hadn't thought about spending the night out there. I had no tent, no sleeping bag, not even a jacket, just a backpack that felt lighter every time I checked it. I had one granola bar left, half a bottle of water, and the flashlight. That was it. I tried to push down the panic clawing at me. I had to think clearly. I needed shelter, somewhere off the ground, away from whatever might move through the woods at night. I scanned the trees until I found a cluster of thick pines. The branches hung low, heavy with needles almost touching the ground. It wasn't much, but it would break the wind and hide me from sight. I crawled under the branches and sat with my knees pulled to my chest. My back ached and the damp earth soaked through my jeans. The woods grew darker and darker until it was hard to tell the branches from the shadows. That was when I heard it again. A crack of a twig. Not close but not far either. My chest froze. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. Another sound, a slow crunch of leaves. Deliberate, measured, not an animal scurrying. Something heavier. I switched off my flashlight and pressed myself flat against the ground, hardly daring to breathe. My ears strained. The steps moved closer, slow, dragging. My skin prickled with the certainty that someone, or something, was out there, moving between the trees, searching. The footsteps paused. The silence was unbearable. I waited, my lungs burning from holding my breath. Then, after what felt like forever, the sound faded, moving off into the woods. I stayed frozen long after, afraid that even the smallest movement would give me away. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. I drifted in and out of a shallow, uneasy sleep, every snap of a twig jerking me awake. The night stretched endlessly, colder and darker than I imagined it could be. When dawn finally bled into the trees, it was weak and gray. My body was stiff, my mouth dry as sand. I crawled out from under the branches, legs trembling. My water was nearly gone. I needed to find my way out before another night came. I picked a direction and forced myself forward, every step heavy. Hours blurred together again, the trees shifting endlessly. Hunger gnawed at me and thirst scratched my throat raw. My mind drifted in hazy circles, but one thing stayed sharp: the feeling of being followed. Sometimes I would catch it, a faint sound behind me, a branch bending back into place, a shadow shifting. Every time I spun around, there was nothing there, just empty trees staring back at me. By the time the sun dipped again, I could barely keep moving. My legs wobbled, my chest heaved with shallow breaths. I stumbled into a small clearing, my eyes burning from fatigue. In the middle of it, half hidden by grass, was a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. A dull, dirty strip of blue. My stomach turned. It wasn't mine. I stood frozen, staring at it. The edges were frayed, but not from weather. It looked ripped, like it had been torn away. Nearby, the grass was pressed down, the earth disturbed as if someone had sat or fallen there. My heart pounded so hard it made me dizzy. I backed away, forcing myself into the trees again. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to get as far away from that spot as possible. My mind filled with images of whoever else had been out here, lost like me, or maybe not lost at all. Maybe they had been hunting. By the time darkness fell again, I was beyond exhausted. I found another cluster of trees to huddle under, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound was too sharp, every shadow too close. I kept thinking about that strip of fabric, about the footsteps, about how silent the woods had gone. The second night stretched on like an eternity. I gripped the flashlight in my hand, flicking it on and off, even though I knew the batteries wouldn't last. My body ached, my mind felt thin and frayed, but one thing burned clear through the fog of fear. I wasn't alone. When morning finally broke again, I pushed myself up, trembling and weak. I stumbled forward, one foot dragging in front of the other, praying for some sign of escape. And then, after what felt like hours, I saw it. A break in the trees, a thin line of gravel glinting in the distance. A road. I nearly collapsed when I reached it. My knees gave out and I dropped onto the gravel, tears burning my eyes. Relief flooded me so sharp it was painful. I had made it out. But as I looked back at the wall of trees, something cold knotted in my chest. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The footsteps, the silence, the torn fabric. Someone had been in there with me, watching, following, waiting. And as I staggered down the road, forcing myself towards safety, I never planned on being out there for long. I just wanted some fresh air, a quiet walk to clear my head, nothing more than that. It was one of those late summer afternoons where the sun still burned strong, but the air carried a heavy stillness that made the woods feel hushed. I parked my car off a small gravel pull-off and headed down a trail I hadn't walked before. At first it looked like any other path, wide enough for two people to walk side by side, dirt packed down by footsteps, broken twigs scattered along the edges. I figured I'd go a few miles, turn around, and be back before the light began to fade. That was the plan. The forest swallowed me faster than I expected. The trees grew taller the deeper I went, the canopy overhead weaving together so tightly that the sunlight thinned into dull patches on the forest floor. The sound of cars faded until there was only the drone of insects and the occasional rattle of leaves shifting in a soft wind. It felt calm at first, even peaceful. But calm has a way of masking how far you're going, and peace can trick you into thinking you're safe. I kept walking, following the trail until it thinned out and began splitting. I saw faint tracks leading one way and another, both looking worn but less obvious than the first part. I didn't think much of it. I chose one without hesitation, telling myself all paths loop eventually, or that I could always turn back. I never imagined how quickly the woods could confuse me, how fast a few wrong steps could undo any sense of direction. The path narrowed until it wasn't much more than a faint line in the dirt. My boots crunched softly on fallen leaves, and I noticed the ground felt uneven. Roots stuck out like small traps. A few times I stumbled, catching myself against rough bark. I started glancing behind me, checking how the trail looked in reverse. That was the first time I felt unease. The way everything behind me seemed to blur together. Every tree looked the same, tall and straight, their trunks pale in the dim light. It struck me that if I strayed even a little, I might not find my way back to the trail at all. I pressed on, slower now, paying attention. Minutes stretched. The air seemed heavier, warmer, as if I had stepped deeper into a pocket of the woods where the breeze didn't reach. Sweat dampened the back of my shirt. My throat felt dry, though I hadn't brought much water, just a small bottle shoved into my pack. The longer I walked, the more I tried to convince myself I'd recognize something. A broken log, a curve of the ground, a stand of ferns. But nothing came back to me. It was all repetition, endless green and brown, the kind that blurs and numbs your thoughts. I decided to turn back. That should have been easy. I retraced my steps, or what I thought were my steps, keeping my eyes sharp. But within minutes, doubt seeped in. The ground sloped differently than I remembered. The branches leaned in unfamiliar ways. I walked faster, telling myself I just needed to push a little further, that soon I'd spot the wider part of the trail again. Instead, the path disappeared altogether. What lay before me was raw forest floor. No line of packed dirt, no signs of human passage. Just leaves and moss and silence. I stopped. For the first time, I felt the weight of the woods pressing in. I wasn't on a trail anymore. I was standing in the middle of endless growth with no markers. I tried not to panic, but my heart began to thump harder. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trunks, searching for any clue. North, south, east, west, it all looked the same. My skin prickled. I chose a direction because I had to. Standing still felt worse. I moved in straight lines as best as I could, picking a distant tree and heading toward it, then choosing another. I thought maybe I'd find a road, or at least hear water, something to follow. But the woods were cruel in their sameness. Hours seemed to slip by, though time was hard to track. The sun above was hidden by thick branches, its position unclear. The first time I realized how far gone I was, I sat down against a tree and pulled out my water. Only half the bottle remained. My stomach tightened as I thought of how foolish I'd been, heading out with nothing but a light pack and no map. My phone had no signal. I turned it over in my hand, staring at the black screen, listening to the faint hum of bugs circling around me. The silence between their buzzes felt endless. I kept moving, but every step carried a deeper weight. The forest floor was soft in places, damp with old rot. The smell of soil clung to my nose. I brushed past thick undergrowth that scratched my arms, leaving faint cuts. Sweat stung as it ran into them. My boots grew heavy with mud. As night began creeping in, the change was sharp. The light shifted to a dim gray wash, then drained until everything became shadow. The woods at night were nothing like the woods by day. Every sound carried more menace. Twigs snapping far off sent shocks of fear through me. Shapes between trees blurred into figures until I blinked and saw they were only shadows. I tried to keep moving but stumbled often, tripping on roots I couldn't see. Finally, I gave up, dropping to the ground against another tree. I didn't sleep much. My body ached from the awkward position. My ears strained for every rustle. At one point, I thought I heard something moving close by. Heavy steps, not an animal skittering. My pulse thundered, and I held my breath, staring into the dark until my eyes watered. But nothing came close, and eventually the noise faded. Morning brought weak relief. The gray light returned, enough to see, but it didn't guide me. Hunger gnawed at me. My stomach cramped. I had no food, only the last sips of water. My tongue felt thick, my lips cracked. I knew I had to keep going. Sitting meant dying out there. The second day blurred worse than the first. I walked for what felt like forever, yet nothing changed. My legs shook with fatigue. I drank the last of my water and kept moving with a dry mouth. The woods began to play tricks. I thought I saw open space ahead, only to reach it and find more trees. I thought I heard a stream. Faint, trickling, but it was only the wind moving through leaves. The disappointment ate at me as much as thirst. That night was worse than the last. I could barely stand when I finally dropped against another tree. My body screamed for rest, but every sound stabbed through my exhaustion. I thought of people who had gone missing in forests, how their bones were found years later, scattered and bleached. I thought of my car sitting empty at the gravel pull-off, doors locked, waiting for an owner who might never return. The hopelessness pressed down until I felt smothered. By the third morning, I was more crawling than walking. My head spun. I couldn't tell if the shadows shifting in the corner of my vision were real or not. My throat burned from thirst, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I started thinking I wouldn't make it. My legs trembled with every step, each one a war. But then I saw it, something that broke the sameness. Through the trees, faint and gray, stood a straight line that didn't belong to nature. I staggered toward it, nearly falling. When I got close, I realized it was a fence. Rusted wire stretched between old posts. My chest swelled with weak hope. A fence meant people. It meant property. It meant I wasn't in endless wilderness anymore. I followed the fence, hand trailing along the metal. My breath came ragged, but I forced my legs to move. After what felt like hours, I heard a sound that nearly made me cry. Distant engines, faint but real. A road. I pushed harder, scraping my arms against wire, tripping until the trees thinned. Then I broke out onto asphalt, collapsing on the edge of a narrow road. Cars passed. The first few didn't stop, maybe thinking I was just resting. But then one slowed, a pickup pulling to the shoulder. The driver jumped out, staring at me with wide eyes. I must have looked awful. Filthy, scratched, pale. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled me to my feet and guided me into the cab. I didn't resist. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore. He drove me to a small town nearby where someone called for help. They gave me water, then food, though I could barely eat. My body shook as I swallowed. The reality of it all came crashing in. I had nearly died alone, in woods that didn't care whether I lived or not. Later, when I sat on a bench outside the small station, wrapped in a blanket, I thought of how simple it had been. A wrong turn, a little too much confidence, not enough preparation. That was all it took. The woods hadn't needed to be haunted. They were dangerous enough on their own. I didn't plan to get lost that day. I told myself it would just be a quick walk, a couple of hours at most, just to clear my head and breathe in some quiet air. I had driven out to a small state forest a little over an hour from home, a place I had only read about online. It wasn't one of those big parks where trails are marked every few hundred feet with colored paint and wooden signs. This was a smaller, less managed forest, the kind that only hunters and serious hikers really knew about. There were a few trailheads with faded maps nailed to posts. But beyond that, it was just dirt paths winding deeper and deeper into trees that all looked the same. The morning was cool and the ground was soft with damp leaves. The air smelled like wet soil, that heavy, earthy smell that sticks to your clothes. I carried a small backpack with a bottle of water, a granola bar, and a flashlight I had thrown in just in case. No compass, no map, nothing serious because I thought I wouldn't need it. I figured I'd just follow the trail in, walk until I felt like turning around, then head back out the same way. At first it was peaceful. The trees stood tall and tight, their trunks dark with morning dew. Birds were calling back and forth overhead, and every so often a squirrel darted across the trail in front of me, its claws scratching on bark before it disappeared up a tree. My boots pressed into the soft ground, leaving shallow impressions in the mud. I liked the quiet, the way the air pressed against me, cool and still, as if the forest was holding its breath. I walked farther, letting the trail wind me deeper. The path grew thinner, choked with brush in some places, but I kept on. I didn't notice right away when it happened, but somewhere along the way the trail simply stopped looking like a trail. It just became a thin line of trampled leaves, then nothing at all. I slowed down, squinting at the ground, looking for where the dirt path continued. I stepped to the left, then to the right, searching for the worn ground that should have guided me back. All I saw were trees, their trunks twisting up into the canopy, their roots breaking through the earth like knotted bones. It was only then that I turned around. I expected to see the trail clear behind me, the way I had come, but it wasn't there. It was just more of the same. Trees stretching into shadows, the ground uneven with leaves, broken branches, and moss. For a long moment I stood still, listening to my own breathing, trying to remember if I had turned somewhere without thinking. My stomach tightened. I wasn't on a trail anymore. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. If I just kept walking in one direction, I would eventually cross a road or find the trail again. The forest wasn't endless. I picked what felt like straight ahead and kept going. I tried to look for small signs, broken twigs, patches of mud, anything to help me remember where I had been. But every step just made things look more the same. The trees crowded in close, the ground dipped and rose, and after only 10 minutes I couldn't tell if I had actually gone straight or if I had been veering off without realizing. The forest was louder now. Every creak of branches overhead, every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of wood made me turn my head. My boots scraped rocks hidden under the leaves. Once or twice I thought I saw a shape between the trees, but when I blinked it was only shadows. Hours passed. The sky above grew brighter and then darker again as clouds rolled across. I checked my watch. It was almost afternoon. My water bottle was already half empty. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, even though the air had cooled. I stopped to rest against a tree, catching my breath. But the moment I leaned there, the forest felt wrong. Like I was being watched, like something was holding itself just out of sight. I forced myself to keep moving. The ground grew rougher the deeper I went. The soft dirt gave way to rocks, some of them slick with moss. My boots slipped more than once, scraping my ankles against sharp edges. A tangle of thorn bushes tore at my pants, leaving thin red scratches across my shins. My hands stung where I had pushed branches out of the way too quickly. I kept trying to keep my direction straight, but every dip and hill pulled me off course. The first real fear hit me when I realized the sun was sliding lower, and I still hadn't found anything that looked like a road, a trail, or even another person. I pulled the flashlight from my bag, but I didn't want to use it yet. I only had one set of batteries. I kept walking faster as if rushing could bring me closer to the edge, but every time I climbed a ridge and looked around, all I saw was more trees stretching into the distance. By evening, I was exhausted. My legs shook from climbing and my mouth was dry even though I rationed my sips of water. I finally stopped near a fallen log, sitting on it with my head hanging low. The forest around me was beginning to change. The light was dim, shadows grew long, and the noises were sharper. I could hear something moving in the brush, small but close. Maybe deer, maybe something else. My heart beat hard at every crack of twigs. I told myself I needed to stay calm. I had a flashlight, a granola bar, and enough strength to last through the night. Tomorrow in daylight I would try again. I found a flat patch of ground near the log, cleared it of sticks, and sat with my back against the wood. I didn't sleep. Every sound kept me awake. At some point, I turned on the flashlight just to see, sweeping the beam across the trees. For a second, the light caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me from the darkness. They blinked, then disappeared into the brush with a low crackling sound. My stomach twisted, but I stayed where I was until the sky finally began to lighten. The second day was worse. My water was almost gone, and my mouth felt like sand. I stumbled more than I walked. My legs ached, my knees throbbed, and every step sent a pulse of pain up through my back. I tried to follow the sunlight as best I could, telling myself east would lead to a road eventually. But the canopy overhead was so thick I could barely tell which way the sun was moving. At times I walked in circles without meaning to, ending up at the same fallen tree or rock I had already passed. The noises in the forest grew heavier with the heat. Flies swarmed my face, buzzing around my ears until I swatted at them in anger. Something larger moved in the distance more than once. Branches snapping, leaves crunching under weight far heavier than a squirrel. Once, as I crossed a dip in the ground, I found fresh tracks in the mud. They were large, clawed, not human. I stared at them for a long time, my chest tight, then forced myself to move quickly away. By the end of that day, I was stumbling more than walking. My head pounded. My lips cracked when I licked them. I finally reached a small stream, a thin line of water cutting through rocks, and I dropped to my knees beside it. I knew it wasn't safe to drink straight from a stream, but I didn't care anymore. I cupped my hands and drank until my stomach hurt, the cold water spilling down my chin and soaking my shirt. It gave me strength, but it also gave me fear. If there were animals tracking the same water, I was near them too. Night came fast the second time. I didn't even try to find a safe place. I just curled up near the stream with my backpack under my head, my flashlight clutched in one hand. I thought I heard something heavy moving close by during the night, but when I shined the light, there was nothing there. The third morning, I was weaker. My legs barely carried me and my stomach cramped with hunger. The granola bar was gone. I chewed on a handful of leaves, spitting them out when they turned bitter. My throat burned. I kept walking because there was nothing else to do. I pushed through thorns, stumbled over rocks, scraped my arms against bark. At one point, I tripped and fell hard onto my side. The breath knocked from me. I lay there for a long time, staring at the canopy overhead, listening to the forest creak and whisper around me. A sharp pain stabbed in my ribs when I tried to stand, but I forced myself upright. I couldn't stop. By midday, I finally saw something that didn't look like endless forest. Through the trees far ahead was a line of light that seemed too straight, too clean. I pushed toward it, branches whipping against my arms until I broke out of the tree line and onto a strip of gravel, a road. The relief almost dropped me to my knees. I stood there shaking, staring at the gray surface stretched out in both directions. It was empty, silent, but it was still a way out. I followed it one step at a time until at last I heard the distant sound of an engine. When the truck came around the bend and slowed beside me, I felt my body finally loosen. My throat was too dry to speak, but I didn't need to. I had made it out. I wasn't lost anymore. The forest had let me go, but it had taken something too. The silence, the endless trees, the feeling of being swallowed whole. I knew it would never leave me. I never thought I would know what it truly felt like to be lost until the day I went into the woods alone. I had camped many times before. I had hiked plenty of trails, and I always believed I had a good sense of direction. I told myself I could handle being out there with just the basics. Some water, a knife, a small pack of food, a lighter, and my phone. I believed it would be a simple day out, walking far enough to escape the sound of the roads and then making my way back before dark. What happened that day taught me that the woods don't care about your plans. They don't care if you've been out there 100 times before. The woods will swallow you whole if you make just one mistake. It started in the late morning. The sun was high, the air was warm but not burning hot, and the sky was as clear as it could be. I parked my car near a small pull-off by the edge of the forest, shouldered my small pack, and stepped into the tree line. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was, almost too quiet. Just the faint calls of distant birds and the occasional rustle of branches moving with the breeze. I followed a trail for a while, dirt worn down by feet over the years, but my plan was to leave the trail after about an hour and push deeper into the woods. I wanted to feel what it was like to be away from the marked paths, where there was no one else, just me and the trees. At first, it felt freeing. I cut away from the trail, marked my spot with a fallen branch leaning against a tree, and started pushing through the undergrowth. The ground was uneven, soft in places where roots twisted up, and covered in dry leaves that crunched under every step. The trees grew taller and closer together the deeper I went. The light shifted from bright and open to dimmer, striped with shadows that stretched like fingers across the forest floor. I moved slow, careful not to trip or twist an ankle, listening to the sound of my own movement because there was little else to hear. Time passed quicker than I realized. I stopped once to drink some water, sitting on a large rock and catching my breath. Sweat ran down my back even though it wasn't hot enough to justify it. But walking off the trail took more energy than I expected. The woods looked endless in every direction. Every tree looked like the last. I told myself not to worry. I had my phone, I had the sun overhead, and I had left the trail only about an hour ago. I could always turn back. But when I stood up again, something felt different. The woods had a way of spinning you around without you realizing it. I picked a direction, the one I thought was back toward the trail, and started moving. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, I didn't see anything that looked familiar. I told myself it was fine, I'd recognize the trail soon enough. But the longer I walked, the more I noticed how the ground dipped and rose in ways I hadn't seen before. The trees grew thicker and fallen logs blocked my path. I didn't remember climbing over logs earlier. That was the first time I felt a pinch of unease. I pulled out my phone and opened the map app. The signal was weak, but the blue dot blinked on the screen. It showed me in the middle of nothing, just green with no marked trails nearby. I tried to backtrack, staring hard at the ground, looking for my own footprints in the leaves. But the forest floor doesn't hold prints for long. A gust of wind, a scatter of leaves, and your path is erased as if you were never there. By the time I admitted I was lost, the sun was already beginning its slow drop. The light that had been bright and clear now angled through the trees, making long shadows that made everything look twisted and uneven. I felt my chest tighten, but I told myself panic wouldn't help. I forced myself to stop walking and sit down. I drank another sip of water, smaller this time, and thought about what to do. The car was parked near the road, and the road wasn't far from the main trail. All I had to do was find the trail again. I stood up, marked another tree with a broken branch so I'd know if I circled back, and moved in the direction where the sun was still shining strongest. I walked for what felt like hours. The woods seemed to repeat themselves. Same clusters of trees, same patches of ferns, same fallen trunks with moss clinging to them. Every time I thought I saw something familiar, I realized it wasn't. My phone battery dropped fast, down to 30%, and I decided to save it, turning the screen off and slipping it back into my pocket. My legs grew sore, my throat dry. The small pack of food I brought felt like nothing now, just a couple of energy bars and a half-empty bottle. When the sun finally dropped lower, the woods began to change. The air cooled quickly and the shadows stretched until they covered everything. The sounds picked up too. The calls of birds faded and were replaced with small, sharp noises. The snap of a twig, the shuffle of something moving through leaves. My ears strained at every sound, trying to decide if it was close or far, animal or just the wind. The woods are different at night. They feel alive in a way that is not comforting. I found a small clearing as the light was almost gone. My legs ached too much to keep pushing, so I sat down on the cold ground and decided I would wait it out. I had my lighter and I gathered some sticks, trying to start a small fire. It took longer than I thought. My hands shook. The twigs were damp and the flame kept dying before catching. Finally, I managed to get a small fire going, just enough to push back the dark around me. I sat there staring into the flames, listening. Every sound out there felt louder now. Something moved in the brush more than once. I couldn't see what it was, and I didn't want to. I pulled my knees close, kept the fire alive, and tried to stay awake. But the night dragged on slow, and every minute felt like an hour. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. Thirst dried my throat until it hurt to swallow, and the cold cut through my clothes. At some point, exhaustion pulled me down, and I dozed off against the hard ground. When I woke, the fire was almost out, just red coals glowing faintly. The woods were still dark, the air colder. My whole body ached, stiff from the ground. I thought I heard something move in the dark beyond the coals. A slow step, then silence. Another step, then silence again. My skin prickled, but I forced myself to stay still, barely breathing, staring into the black shapes between the trees. I never saw what it was. Eventually, the steps faded and the woods grew quiet again. When light finally came, it felt weaker than I expected. A pale gray spread through the trees as the sun climbed, but it did little to warm me. My mouth was dry, my head throbbed, and my legs felt heavy. I stood and started walking again, choosing a direction without much thought anymore. My only plan was to keep moving until I found something. Hours passed. The woods stretched on endlessly. My phone battery finally died and I stuffed it deep in my pack. I ate the last of the energy bars, leaving only water that I rationed in small sips. My legs shook as I walked. My throat burned when I tried to swallow and my mind grew heavy. I kept expecting to see the road, a fence, or even another hiker, but nothing came. Just more trees, more shadows, more endless green and brown. By the third day, I was barely moving. My body felt like it was running on fumes. My lips cracked, my stomach cramped, and I had to stop every few minutes just to catch my breath. I tried following the sun, but clouds rolled in, covering the sky. The woods grew darker, colder. I began to wonder if I would ever get out, if anyone would find me out there before it was too late. That evening, as the light faded again, I stumbled across something that froze me in place. A piece of trash. A crushed can, rusted but unmistakably human. My chest heaved. I bent down, picked it up, and turned it over in my shaking hands. It meant someone had been here. It meant I wasn't deep in some untouched wilderness. I dropped the can and looked around, searching for more. A few feet away, I saw another sign, a boot print pressed faintly into the dirt. I followed it, every step trembling. The print led to another, then another, faint but there. My legs moved on their own, pushing forward. And then through the trees, I saw a thin line of gravel. My heart jumped. I stumbled forward, breaking through the brush until I was standing on the edge of a narrow road. My knees gave out and I fell hard onto the gravel, tears stinging my eyes. I wasn't sure where I was or how far from my car, but I was out. I was on a road. I forced myself up, dragging one foot in front of the other, following the road until I heard the faint hum of an engine in the distance. A car came around the bend, slowing as it spotted me. The driver rolled down the window, staring wide-eyed at me, dirty, shaking, pale, and worn down. I couldn't find the strength to speak, only raise my hand. The car stopped and the driver stepped out. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed again. That was how I made it out of the woods. 3 days lost, starving, thirsty, and broken down. I had thought I knew what I was doing. Thought I could handle it, but the woods don't care about what you think you can handle. I learned how fast you can vanish out there. How easy it is to disappear without a trace. I still think about the sounds I heard that first night. The slow steps just beyond the firelight. I never saw what it was. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe not. All I know is that the woods almost kept me, and I'll never step into them the same way again. I had gone into the woods that morning with nothing but the idea of clearing my head. The plan was simple. I would park my car near a trailhead I had used once before, walk a few miles in, find a quiet spot where no one would bother me, and then come back before the sun went down. It was supposed to be just a few hours of fresh air. I didn't carry much with me because I didn't think I would need it. I had a small backpack with a water bottle, a pack of nuts, my phone, and a cheap flashlight that I threw in out of habit. I didn't pack extra clothes, no map, no compass, nothing that someone who was serious about hiking would carry. I thought it was just going to be another simple walk. The first part of the day felt easy. The woods were quiet, with the sound of birds echoing through the trees and the crunch of dry leaves under my shoes. The sun filtered down through the branches in broken patches and the air was cool, but not uncomfortable. I kept walking deeper because it felt calming. I wanted distance between me and the world I had left behind at the parking lot. I didn't look behind me often, and I didn't pay close attention to where the trail started blending into other paths. After about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while, but I didn't think much of it. I kept moving forward, assuming the path would loop back or I would find a way that looked familiar. It wasn't until I stopped to drink water that I noticed how quiet everything was. The birds that had been calling out all morning were silent. The only sound was the wind moving high up in the trees. I stood still and tried to listen for anything else, maybe distant voices or footsteps, but there was nothing. That's when the first uneasy feeling crept into me. I couldn't remember the last landmark I had passed. The trail under my feet didn't look like a trail anymore. It was just packed soil with scattered branches. I tried to walk back the way I thought I had come, but every turn looked the same. The trees were tall and close together, their trunks gray and rough, their tops thick enough to block most of the light. The longer I walked, the less sure I became. My phone had no signal. The little arrow on its map app floated in the middle of blank space, refusing to anchor itself anywhere. I thought about using the sun to guide me, but the canopy made it hard to see where it was. Sometimes I caught glimpses of light, but as I turned around and moved, the direction shifted. The forest felt like it was spinning me in circles. I told myself I wasn't really lost, that if I kept calm and kept moving, I would find something familiar. I tried to remember small details like broken branches or oddly shaped trees to guide me back, but after 10 or 15 minutes, everything blurred together. My water bottle was half empty already. By afternoon, the sky had grown darker. Clouds had moved in, and the light that reached the ground was dim and gray. I could feel the change in the air, colder now, with dampness clinging to it. I hadn't eaten much, just a handful of nuts, and I started feeling the weakness in my legs. I tried shouting once, just a quick call to see if anyone might hear me, but the sound seemed to vanish into the trees without an echo. It made me feel smaller, like the forest swallowed my voice whole. I didn't shout again. The more I walked, the worse it became. My shoes weren't meant for long hikes, and the ground was uneven with roots and rocks. My ankles twisted often, and once I stumbled hard enough that I scraped my palm on a sharp branch. The cut wasn't deep, but the blood left a sticky layer on my skin. I wiped it on my pants, leaving a red smear. As evening fell, the forest changed again. The light turned to a dull blue, then faded fast. I tried using my flashlight, but the beam was weak, just a narrow tunnel of light that barely showed me a few feet ahead. The trees around me looked even taller in the dark, their trunks stretching up like walls, their branches moving with the wind. Every small sound made me freeze. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, something moving quickly in the undergrowth. It could have been animals, maybe deer, maybe smaller things, but every noise made my heart pound harder. I realized I had walked myself into real danger. I found a spot under a cluster of thick trees and sat down. I didn't want to keep walking blindly in the dark. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and my stomach was hollow. I tried to rest, but the ground was cold and damp. Every time I closed my eyes, a new sound startled me awake. Something moved nearby, close enough that I could hear the steady crunch of leaves as it walked. I held my flashlight tightly, pointing it toward the sound, but the light only bounced off more trees. The noise stopped, and I sat frozen for what felt like an hour, waiting for it to return. The night dragged on. I shivered, pulling my thin jacket tighter around me, but it didn't help. My body was stiff, my skin prickled with cold, and my teeth chattered. I thought about fire, but I had nothing to start one. The thought of warmth only made the cold worse. My mind spun with panic. I pictured myself wandering until my legs gave out, collapsing somewhere with no one to find me. The forest was bigger than I had imagined. My small mistake of going off trail had turned into something that felt impossible to fix. When morning came, it wasn't much better. The sky was still heavy with clouds, and everything was soaked with dew. My clothes were damp, and my shoes were caked in mud. I forced myself to stand and keep moving, thinking I had to find water. My bottle was nearly empty, and the small sips I took only made me thirstier. I listened for the sound of running water, but all I heard was the endless rustling of trees. By midday, hunger gnawed at me harder. The bag of nuts was almost gone. I chewed the last few pieces slowly, trying to make them last, but they only reminded me of how empty I was. I started noticing things I wouldn't normally think about. Mushrooms growing on rotting logs, berries on thorny bushes. I didn't know which were safe, so I didn't touch them. My stomach cramped and I kept walking. The second night was worse than the first. My body was weaker and every noise seemed louder. I thought I heard heavy steps behind me more than once, and once I swore I saw movement just beyond the reach of my flashlight. A shadow slipping between the trees. I stopped breathing, straining to hear, but nothing came closer. I didn't know if it was real or if my fear was twisting everything. I didn't sleep. My mind kept replaying mistakes, how I should have turned back earlier, how I should have brought more, how I had been careless. I kept thinking about people who got lost in the woods and were never found. Their names ended up on small plaques, or sometimes they weren't remembered at all. I wondered if that was going to be me, nothing more than bones under leaves years later. By the third day, I was hardly walking straight. My throat burned, my lips cracked, and I could barely lift my feet. I stumbled often, scraping my legs on branches. My flashlight had started to fade, the beam growing weaker each time I turned it on. I rationed it, saving it for when I absolutely needed it. Late that afternoon, when I thought I couldn't take another step, I heard something different. It wasn't an animal. It was a low hum, steady and distant. I froze, straining to listen. It came again, faint but clear, the sound of a motor. My chest tightened with hope. Somewhere nearby there had to be a road. I forced my legs to move faster, chasing the sound through the trees. I stumbled downhill, sliding on loose soil, crashing through bushes, ignoring the scratches tearing at my skin. The sound grew louder. Then I saw it. Through a break in the trees, a strip of gray asphalt wet with rain. I almost didn't believe it was real. I dragged myself toward it, every step painful but driven by relief. When I finally broke out of the tree line, I collapsed on the roadside. My knees hit the ground hard, but I didn't care. I lay there breathing heavy, staring at the sky. The road was empty. No cars passing, but I knew if I stayed there, someone would eventually come. I wasn't lost anymore. I was beaten down, weak and shaking, but I had found my way out. The fear didn't leave right away. Even lying on the pavement, I felt the weight of the woods pressing in behind me, the silence of it, the way it had trapped me and twisted every thought into panic. I would never forget how endless it felt, how close I had come to not making it out. When the first car finally appeared and slowed to a stop, I pushed myself up enough to wave. My body hurt, my throat could barely form words, but it didn't matter. I was safe. I was out. The woods hadn't taken me, though for a long time I thought they would, and that was the end of it. Here's a full-length, detailed, realistic horror story written in first person about being lost in the woods. It is long, continuous, and ends with a clear, grounded conclusion. No fantasy or supernatural elements. I remember the day I set out like it was burned into my memory. The air was cool, the kind of autumn air that makes you breathe a little deeper, sharp with the smell of damp leaves and earth. I had planned a simple hike, something to take my mind off the noise of the world. I thought I knew the area well enough. I had studied the map the night before and figured I'd just cut through some of the lesser-used trails, make a loop, and be back before the sun dropped. I wasn't careless. At least I didn't think I was. But sometimes thinking you know enough is the most dangerous mistake you can make. The trail started easy, wide and firm underfoot, packed with years of boots and bike tires. The trees were tall on either side, not yet bare, but shedding steadily, so the ground crunched under every step. I liked that sound. It made me feel small in a good way, like the woods had its own voice and I was just moving through it. The deeper I went, the quieter things became. The hum of the town behind me disappeared until it was only birds, the occasional snap of a branch and the wind pushing through the canopy. At first, I followed the markers nailed to the trees. Bright colors stood out against the bark, leading me forward without question. But after an hour or so, I spotted a narrower track peeling off to the right. It wasn't marked, but it looked worn enough to be traveled. That's where my mistake started. I figured it was just another connector trail, one that would bend back toward the main route. I turned onto it, not hesitating. The path was thinner, choked with roots and covered in leaves, but I liked that it felt less walked. The air smelled stronger here, like wet wood and decay. I kept walking, telling myself I'd rejoin the main trail soon. The sun was high and I wasn't worried. The ground sloped slightly downward, and I noticed the air felt cooler, wetter. It wasn't long before I realized I hadn't seen another marker. I stopped, looked back the way I came, and felt a jolt of unease when the trail seemed to disappear into the trees. I pressed on, thinking it had to connect somewhere. I didn't want to backtrack yet. The slope grew steeper, pulling me deeper. The trees closed in, branches arching overhead so thick that the light dimmed even though the sun was still high. My boots slid on damp leaves. I stumbled more than once, catching myself on rough bark that left my palms raw. My breathing grew louder, sharper. When I finally stopped to check the time, the light on my phone told me it was later than I thought. Almost 2 hours had passed since I had turned onto this side trail. I should have seen another junction by now. Instead, the woods looked the same in every direction. I turned around to retrace my steps, but the path I thought I'd followed was gone. The leaves had fallen thick, covering everything. My footprints, if they'd been there, were lost in the mess. A prickling heat ran through my chest as I realized I didn't know which way was back. The trees offered no clues. I picked the most worn-looking direction and started walking fast, scanning for anything familiar. Nothing came. The air grew still, heavy. Even the birds were quiet. My footsteps echoed too loud in my ears, crunch after crunch. Every sound reminding me I was alone and maybe walking deeper into nowhere. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself people get turned around all the time. All I had to do was keep track of the sun and push in one direction until I hit a road or a main trail. I told myself that again and again, but it didn't erase the sinking feeling in my stomach. The woods didn't stay friendly as the day stretched on. The terrain grew rougher, tangled with fallen trees and thorny undergrowth that ripped at my clothes and skin. Every step was harder. Every push through brush left scratches across my arms. I sweated until my shirt clung to me, then shivered as the wind cut through the damp fabric. The sound of running water teased me in the distance, so I followed it, thinking if I found a stream I could use it as a guide. But when I reached it, the water was shallow, sluggish, and it wound through the forest in confusing bends. Following it only led me deeper into gnarled thickets where the ground sucked at my boots like mud. As the sky dimmed, panic started to claw at the edges of my thoughts. I hadn't brought gear for more than a day hike. No tent, no sleeping bag. Just a small backpack with water, a protein bar, a flashlight, and a thin jacket. I checked the bottle and realized I had less than half left. My mouth was already dry and I hadn't eaten since morning. When night fell, it came fast. The canopy made it worse, cutting out what little moonlight there was. I switched on the flashlight, its narrow beam slicing into the dark, but it only lit up small circles of ground and trunks, leaving everything else black and silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were pressing in tighter with every step. I forced myself to keep moving until I found a small clearing, barely wide enough to stretch out in. I decided I'd stay there for the night. The ground was cold and damp, and every time I shifted, sticks dug into my back. The sounds of the forest seemed louder in the dark. Rustling leaves, distant cracks, and once, something moving heavy just out of reach of my light. I held the flashlight in my hand until my grip ached, pointing it toward every noise, but nothing showed. I barely slept, drifting in and out, shivering in the wet cold. When morning finally came, I stood up sore and stiff. My throat ached with thirst. I forced myself to sip from the bottle, knowing it wouldn't last much longer. I ate half the protein bar, trying to make it stretch. The daylight gave me hope, but it also showed how deep I had gone. Trees as far as I could see, endless trunks and undergrowth, no sign of trails or clearings. I decided to push north, using the sun as my guide. I thought if I kept one steady direction, I'd have to hit something eventually. Hours passed, my legs burning, my lips cracking from thirst. I stumbled across deer tracks, at first thinking they might lead me somewhere, but they only wound in circles before disappearing into thick brush. By midday, I was dizzy. The world tilted when I moved too fast, and every noise in the woods seemed sharper, closer. My water was almost gone. I crouched by a muddy puddle, staring at it for a long time before I forced myself to drink. The taste was foul, thick with dirt, but I was too thirsty to care. It sat heavy in my stomach, making me queasy. The second night was worse. My flashlight was dimming, the beam fading to a weak glow. I turned it off to save what was left and sat in the pitch dark. Every sound made my skin crawl. Branches cracking, brush shifting, maybe animals moving just beyond reach. Once I swore I heard slow, heavy steps circling. I held my breath until my lungs burned, gripping a broken branch like a weapon, waiting for something to break through the dark. Nothing did. The fear was worse than anything I could see. When dawn broke again, my body felt like it was shutting down. My legs shook with every step. My stomach cramped with hunger. My head pounded. I thought about stopping, just lying down and letting the woods take me. But some part of me refused. I kept walking, even when it felt like I was only dragging myself through mud and leaves. Late that day, I heard a sound that nearly broke me with relief. A low rumble, faint but real. At first I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, the sound of an engine. I staggered toward it, forcing myself through thorns and brush until my arms bled. I tripped, crawled, pushed through until finally the trees broke open. A dirt road cut through the forest, rough and narrow, but real. I fell to my knees on it, gasping, crying without meaning to. A few minutes later, a truck came around the bend, brakes screeching when the driver saw me. I must have looked half dead, filthy, scratched, clothes torn, and eyes wild. He got out, cautious at first, but I didn't care. I stood, barely able to stay upright, and waved with shaking arms. He helped me into the truck, gave me water, and drove me back toward town. The whole way, I kept staring out the window at the trees rushing past, endless and thick, realizing how easily they could have swallowed me for good. I had thought I was just going for a short hike. Instead, I learned how quickly the woods can strip everything from you. Your sense of direction, your strength, your calm. If I had missed that road by even a little, if I had collapsed 1 hour earlier, I might never have been found. Even now, safe and back in my own bed, the memory of those 2 nights doesn't leave me. The woods aren't evil, but they don't care. If you go unprepared, if you let confidence blind you, they'll take you without a sound, and no one will ever know where you went. I had always thought of the woods as a quiet place, a place where the noise of the world could not follow. That was what pulled me out there in the first place. I wanted silence, and I thought I would find it if I left the car behind, strapped on my pack, and walked deep enough into the trees. I parked on the side of a gravel road that cut through miles of forest and followed a trail that was supposed to loop back around. The map on my phone showed it clearly, a neat curve marked in green that bent back to where I had started. But phones are only good when service is there, and the deeper I walked, the more the bars on the screen vanished until the top corner was empty. I told myself it didn't matter. I had plenty of daylight left and the trail was simple. The woods were thick, the kind of thick that swallows sound. I could hear only my boots pushing through dry leaves, the soft creak of my pack straps, and now and then a branch bending high above me. The air smelled like damp dirt, pine sap, and old leaves breaking down into the ground. It was cool in the shade, cooler than I expected. And the deeper I went, the darker it felt, even though the sun was still high. At first, I enjoyed it. The calm was what I had come for. I liked the way the world outside seemed to vanish. No cars, no voices, no buzzing of wires. Just trees in every direction. I followed the path and it wound upward deeper into the hills. The trail markers were there at first. Painted blazes on trees, little wooden signs nailed up years ago. I kept an eye on them as I went, but somewhere along the way I stopped seeing them. Maybe I had been too focused on my footing, or maybe they were too faded. I kept walking, convinced I was still on the loop. It wasn't until the path thinned out and split into something rougher that I realized something was wrong. The ground looked less trampled, more wild. Roots twisted across it, tall grass pushed through, and fallen branches lay unbroken across what should have been a clear trail. I paused, staring at it, waiting for my sense of direction to kick in. I glanced back, but the path I had walked was nothing more than the same mess of trees and leaves stretching behind me. I pulled my phone out and looked again. No service. The map app was frozen at the last point it had loaded, a little blue dot floating far behind where I knew I was. My stomach tightened, but I shoved the phone away and told myself it wasn't bad. I just had to backtrack, keep calm, and follow my footprints if I could. But the ground was hard with roots and dry leaves. My boots hadn't left much behind, and every direction looked the same. I turned in circles more than once trying to spot something familiar. A tree I had noticed earlier, a bend in the land, anything. But all I saw were straight trunks rising in every direction, their tops lost in a web of branches. The deeper I looked, the more it felt like the woods folded in on themselves. I picked a direction and started walking, telling myself it was back toward the car. The ground dipped and climbed, the air got heavier, and I started sweating. My pack rubbed at my shoulders. I checked my watch and saw more time had passed than I thought. The sun had shifted, spilling light at an angle, and that was when fear began to rise in me, slow but sharp. Every step forward seemed to bring me deeper, not closer. The silence that had been peaceful earlier was now crushing. I could hear only my own movements, the rasp of my breath, the thud of my heart when I paused. At one point I heard a branch snap somewhere in the distance. It froze me in place. I scanned the trees, waiting, but nothing moved. The sound faded back into the heavy quiet. I kept walking faster than before, tripping on roots, scraping my hands on bark as I steadied myself. I thought about staying put, waiting for morning, but I had no idea if anyone ever came this deep. The thought of sitting in the dark with no fire, no service, no way to signal, my chest tightened at the thought. I needed to keep moving, find a road, a creek, something that would lead me out. The hours stretched. My water bottle got lighter. My legs ached. My shirt was damp against my back. The sun slipped lower, streaks of light cutting through the branches until finally the woods dimmed into gray. Shadows thickened around me, and every tree started to look like the last. I tried to push faster, but the ground seemed to tilt, leading me downhill into thicker brush. Brambles scratched my arms, caught at my pack. When darkness came, it came fast. One moment there was a faint blue light between the trees. The next it was gone, replaced by a heavy blackness that pressed in from every side. I dug out my flashlight, the small one I had packed without much thought. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, but beyond it was nothing but endless trees. Night in the woods is not quiet. It is a different kind of noise. Crickets filled the air. Strange calls echoed far away, and every rustle in the brush felt close, too close. The beam of my flashlight shook with my hand. My legs burned with exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every time I thought about resting, the dark around me felt like it was waiting, like if I sat down, I would never stand up again. At some point, I realized I was walking in circles. I saw the same twisted oak twice, the same rock covered in moss. I cursed under my breath, though the sound seemed to vanish in the vast black space. Panic chewed at me, and I forced myself to stop moving. I leaned against a tree, trying to breathe, but the sound of my breath was too loud. It felt like it would draw things I couldn't see. I pulled my pack off and dug through it. 1 bottle of water left, half a bag of trail mix, a thin rain jacket, no tent, no blanket, nothing for real shelter. I had come out expecting a few hours, not a night. My flashlight flickered, and I tapped it hard, begging the batteries to hold. I told myself I had to wait. That was the only choice left. Wait for daylight, then keep moving. But waiting in the dark was worse than walking. Every sound stretched my nerves tighter. Leaves rustled as if something was circling me. A sharp crack of wood made me jerk the light toward it. But there was nothing there, only brush and trees. My imagination clawed at me, making shapes in the dark. I sat on the cold ground, knees drawn up. The flashlight balanced against my legs so I didn't waste the beam. The dirt was damp under me. Mosquitoes whined in my ears. I stared at the trees until my eyes ached, waiting for the first gray hint of morning. My head dipped once or twice, heavy with exhaustion, but every sound snapped me back awake. When morning finally came, it was slow. A pale gray glow seeped through the branches, soft at first, then brighter. I stood on shaky legs, my back stiff, my throat dry. My flashlight was nearly dead, the beam weak. I shoved it away and stretched my pack on again. My muscles screamed, but I forced them to move. I walked. That was all there was left to do. Pick a direction, keep moving, trust that somewhere out there was a road, a trail, some sign of people. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then sank. My water was gone by afternoon. My lips cracked, and each swallow was painful. My body slowed, but fear kept pushing me. On the second night, I didn't have the energy to fight the dark. I found a hollow between 2 trees and slumped there. My stomach cramped from hunger, but I couldn't eat more than a few bites. Every bone in me ached. The dark felt heavier than before, but I couldn't keep my eyes open. Sleep dragged me under in short bursts, broken by noises I couldn't place. Morning came again, and I staggered back to my feet. My head spun, but I kept going. By then, I was running on instinct, nothing else. My mind felt slow, my body numb. The woods looked endless. It was late in the afternoon when I heard it, the faint rush of water. At first I thought it was wind, but the sound grew louder as I stumbled toward it. My heart hammered. I pushed through thick brush until suddenly the trees opened to a small creek tumbling over rocks. The sight almost broke me. I dropped to my knees and cupped handfuls of water, gulping until my stomach cramped. Following the creek felt like the only choice. Water had to lead somewhere. I staggered along its bank, slipping on wet stones, catching myself on branches. My legs shook, but I kept moving. The sun dipped again, shadows stretching long across the water. Just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I saw it. A sliver of gravel cutting across the trees on the far side. A road. I stumbled toward it, crashing through brush until I dropped onto the gravel. The sight of tire tracks and the faint smell of oil in the dirt made my throat tighten with relief. I didn't care which way I went. I just followed the road, dragging one foot after the other until the glow of headlights appeared in the distance. I waved both arms, my voice raw as I tried to shout. The vehicle slowed, then stopped. I collapsed onto the gravel as footsteps rushed toward me. I had made it out. The woods had nearly swallowed me, but I had made it back. And I knew, standing there in the fading light as people pulled me up and spoke words I barely understood, that I would never step into the forest alone again. I had not planned on going deep into the woods that day, but I told myself I needed some time away from everything. Life had been feeling too loud, too busy, and too heavy, and I thought a few days outdoors with nothing but trees, dirt, and the sound of water would reset me. I packed light, just a tent, a sleeping bag, a small camp stove, a metal pot, a knife, a map that was older than I'd like to admit, a compass, and enough food for 4 days if I rationed it right. I parked my car at the small dirt lot near the trailhead, slung the backpack over my shoulders, and started walking deeper into the green silence. The first day went fine. The path was clear, the air cool but not cold, and the late summer sun pressed through the trees in golden streaks. I remember the sound of cicadas rising and falling like waves, the crunch of dried leaves under my boots, and the heavy weight of my pack digging into my shoulders. I wasn't in a rush, and I figured if I reached the creek by evening, I'd set up camp there. The water would give me a steady supply, and the open space near the bank would make for a comfortable camp. By dusk, I had pitched my tent on a flat piece of ground not far from the creek. I boiled some water, ate a packet of rice and tuna, and listened to the sound of the flowing water while the sky turned orange and then gray. Everything felt calm, steady, predictable. I had no idea that would be the last night I felt that way for a very long time. The next morning I wanted to push further in, maybe try to reach a ridge that I had seen marked faintly on the map. It wasn't a marked trail, not really, just a faint dotted line that probably hadn't been used in years. I should have known better, but I told myself I could handle it. I had a compass. I had a map. I had food. I had water. What could go wrong? The forest changed as I moved further. The trees grew closer, darker, the ground softer and covered with a thick layer of pine needles that muffled every step. I walked for hours, following the compass and the rough direction I thought the ridge would be. The sun was high, but under the trees it was dim and shadows stretched across everything. By the time I realized the trail I thought I was on had disappeared, I was too far in to turn around easily. I tried to backtrack. That was my first mistake. Every tree looked the same, every slope felt familiar, and the creek that I thought I could hear faded away until it was gone. I turned in circles more times than I could count, trying to find my own footprints in the soft dirt, but the pine needles had erased them. By late afternoon, I had no idea where I was. I forced myself to calm down. Panic would waste energy and make me sloppy. I picked a direction and told myself I'd walk it until I found water, then follow the water downstream until I found something, anything, man-made. That's what they always said. Find water, follow it down, you'll eventually hit civilization. I walked until dark, but no water appeared. My legs ached, my back throbbed, and my throat felt dry. I hadn't found a creek, but I needed to stop. I chose a small clearing between two thick trees, set down my pack, and lit a small fire with the matches I had brought. The flame gave me comfort, but the woods pressed in on all sides. Every snap of a twig made me jerk my head. I ate a small handful of trail mix, drank the last bit of water from my bottle, and tried to sleep. That night, I woke several times to noises. The woods are never really silent. Branches fall, animals move, the wind pushes through the canopy, but each sound felt sharper, closer, more threatening. I imagined eyes watching me from the tree line, imagined steps crunching slowly toward me, imagined shapes I couldn't see in the dark. I stayed awake most of the night, staring at the embers until they died down to black. By morning, I was exhausted, but I forced myself to keep moving. I told myself I had to find water. My mouth felt dry and sticky. My head pounded. I stumbled through the brush, scratching my arms on branches, tearing my pants on thorns. Around midday, I finally heard it, the faint trickle of running water. Relief surged through me as I followed the sound down a slope, pushing through thick brush until I found a narrow stream cutting between rocks. I dropped to my knees, cupped the water in my hands, and drank greedily. I knew it wasn't safe to drink untreated, but I didn't care. My body screamed for it. The cold water tasted like life itself. I filled my bottle, boiled a little with my stove, and forced myself to rest before moving again. I followed the stream downstream for the rest of the day. At times it widened, at times it narrowed, sometimes disappearing into thick brush before emerging again. I hoped it would lead me to a river, maybe even a road. The sky dimmed, and I built another fire by the water, setting my tent close by. That night was worse. I heard something move in the trees across the stream, a slow, steady crack of branches, heavy. Not the quick rustle of a deer, not the light scurry of a rabbit. Something larger. I froze, gripping my knife, staring across the dark water. The fire cast only a small circle of light, and beyond that was nothing but blackness. The sound stopped after a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been standing there watching me. The next day, I kept following the stream. I was moving slower now. My legs shook with each step, and my food supply was shrinking fast. I tried to catch fish with my knife and a sharpened stick, but the water was too fast and my hands weren't steady enough. Hunger gnawed at me. The stream eventually joined a larger river. My spirits lifted again. This had to lead somewhere. I followed it, but the river was wide and winding, and the ground beside it rough and uneven. At one point, I slipped on a wet rock and tore open the palm of my hand. Blood smeared across the rock, bright against the gray stone. I wrapped it with a strip of cloth from my shirt, but the pain made it harder to grip anything. That night, I built my fire closer to the riverbank, but I could still hear things in the woods behind me. Cracks, snaps, slow movements. I told myself it was animals, but the pattern felt deliberate. Like something pacing, like something following. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would tear through my chest. By the fourth day, I was weak. My food was nearly gone. My steps were slow, clumsy. I tripped often, scraping my knees, falling into the dirt. The woods pressed in thicker than before, the air heavy, the canopy blocking out the sun. I had no idea if I was closer to safety or deeper into nowhere. That afternoon, I saw something in the mud near the riverbank that froze me in place. A footprint. Human. Barefoot. The toes pressed deep into the wet ground, the heel sunk down. It wasn't mine. It couldn't be mine. I had been wearing boots the entire time. My stomach dropped. The print was fresh. The edges sharp. The water not yet pooled into it. Someone else was out here. Maybe lost like me. Maybe not. I didn't know if I should feel relief or terror. I crouched by it, staring at it for a long time before I forced myself to move on. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about that footprint, about the noises in the woods, about the way the trees seemed to close in tighter each day. I sat by the fire with my knife in my lap, eyes scanning the dark. At some point deep in the night, I heard it again, Steps, slow, steady, on the other side of the firelight. My chest tightened. The steps circled just outside the glow, crunching on leaves, breaking small twigs. I gripped the knife until my hand ached, my eyes straining into the dark. I never saw anything. The steps stopped and the woods went silent. By morning, I felt broken. I stumbled forward, following the river, forcing myself to move one step at a time. My stomach cramped with hunger. My head spun. The trees blurred together. Then, late in the day, I saw something that made my heart leap. A wooden post. Just a single post, half rotted, sticking up from the ground by the river, but it meant something had been here before. People. Civilization. I pushed toward it, nearly falling with each step, and soon I found the faint remains of a trail. Overgrown, barely visible, but there. I followed it for hours until I stumbled out of the trees and into an open gravel road. I collapsed to my knees, tears in my eyes. The sight of tire tracks pressed into the dirt filling me with a relief so sharp it almost hurt. I had made it out. When I finally found help later that night, waving down a truck that came along the road, I looked back toward the dark line of trees. My body was weak, my mind fogged, but one thought burned clear through it all. I hadn't been alone out there. I didn't plan on getting lost that day. The trip was supposed to be simple, just a short hike through the woods before heading back to my car and driving home before sunset. I'd done it before. The same trail, the same parking lot, the same loop that circled back after a few miles. It wasn't even supposed to be a challenge, but sometimes small mistakes grow into big ones, and out there in the trees, away from the noise of the world, those mistakes felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. The morning started clear. The air was cool, the kind of cool that brushes against your skin like cold water before the sun rises high enough to warm it. I parked my car at the dirt lot at the edge of the trail and slung my small pack over my shoulders. Inside was nothing special. Just a couple of water bottles, a granola bar, a flashlight, and a folded-up map of the park that I had stuffed in there months earlier. I barely looked at it anymore. I thought I knew the place well enough. The first part of the trail was wide and open, the kind of path that dozens of feet stamped down daily. It smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Sunlight filtered through the tops of tall trees, making patterns that shifted across the ground as I walked. Birds called to each other overhead, and the woods felt alive in the way they always do in the morning. I walked at an easy pace, not in a rush. I had the whole day, I thought. After about an hour, I decided to take a side trail I hadn't tried before. That was the first mistake. It looked narrow, but clear enough. A sign stood at its entrance, weathered and hard to read, the letters peeling and faded. I could only make out part of the word, something like north. Spur. It seemed interesting, and I told myself it would loop back eventually. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The wide open trail behind me gave way to something narrower, with thorny bushes crowding both sides. The path wasn't as beaten down. I had to push branches away from my face more often, and I noticed patches where the dirt was soft, like no one had walked there for weeks. Still, I kept going. I convinced myself it would reconnect. The air grew warmer as the day pushed forward. The sun was higher now, shining strong through gaps in the trees. I stopped for water, took a deep breath, and listened. That was when I realized how quiet it had gotten. No birds, no wind moving the leaves, just my own breathing. A thin sweat had formed across my forehead, and I wiped it with the back of my sleeve. After another half hour, the trail faded even more. It was harder to tell where it went. Fallen branches crisscrossed the ground, and the dirt gave way to patches of tall grass. I slowed down, scanning the ground carefully for signs of where others had walked. At some point, I stepped past a log and looked back, only to notice that the way behind me didn't even look like a trail anymore. That's when it hit me. I didn't actually know where I was. I told myself not to panic. I could always turn around, retrace my steps, and find the main path. So I tried. I turned back, walked carefully, eyes darting across the ground for the line of flattened dirt that would mean I was still on track. But the woods didn't line up anymore. Everything looked the same. Trees standing shoulder to shoulder, trunks coated in moss, the ground scattered with leaves and branches. After 10 minutes, I stopped and turned in a circle, scanning every direction. There was no sign of the original path. My chest tightened. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to keep moving. I picked a direction that I thought was right and walked with purpose. I told myself if I kept heading one way, I'd eventually run into something. A road, another trail, anything. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. The ground sloped downward, uneven and muddy in places. The trees pressed closer together. I tripped twice on roots hidden under piles of leaves. My water bottle was half empty already, and I tried not to think about it. Every step felt louder than it should have, each crack of a twig under my boots echoing in the silence. At one point, I thought I heard something behind me. A rustle, faint but sharp enough to stop me cold. I froze, heart hammering, staring back through the trees. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably just a squirrel or a deer, but the feeling that I wasn't alone didn't fade. It clung to me as I pushed forward. The sun began to drop lower and shadows stretched longer across the ground. That's when panic really started to set in. I had no idea how long I'd been walking, but it was clear now that I wasn't finding the trail again. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat and my throat was dry. I took another sip of water, then forced myself to stop and think. If I kept wandering aimlessly, I'd only dig myself deeper. I remembered something I'd once read, that if you're lost, you should stay put. Let people come to you. But the thought of sitting still while the woods swallowed me up felt impossible. I climbed a hill, thinking maybe I'd spot something from higher ground. The climb was rough, my legs burning as I pulled myself over rocks and up steep dirt. At the top, all I saw was more trees stretching endlessly in every direction. No roads, no rooftops, nothing. The realization hit me hard. I was truly lost. Night came fast. The woods changed with it. What little sound there had been during the day faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional crack from the trees as the temperature dropped. The darkness was thick, pressing in from every side. I pulled my flashlight from my pack, clicking it on. The narrow beam lit up branches and bushes ahead, but beyond that, there was only black. I found a spot near the base of a tree and tried to make a small space to sit. The ground was cold and damp. I pulled my knees to my chest, clutching the flashlight. Every noise around me made my skin crawl. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of some animal I couldn't see. I barely slept, jerking awake at the slightest sound. The night dragged on, slow and endless, each minute stretching longer than it should have. By morning I felt drained, like I hadn't slept at all. My throat was raw with thirst. I finished off one water bottle, saving the last one for later. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. Food didn't matter yet. I just needed to find a way out. I walked again, this time slower, more careful. I marked trees with small scratches from a rock I found, just to make sure I wasn't walking in circles. Hours passed and nothing changed. The woods felt like a maze with no exit. Every direction the same. The heat grew stronger, pressing down like a weight on my shoulders. Sweat rolled down my face, stinging my eyes. At some point, I stumbled upon a small stream. Relief flooded me at the sight of it. I knelt down, scooping water into my hands, splashing it across my face. The cold shocked me awake. I filled my empty bottle and drank greedily, even though I knew I should have been more careful. The water tasted earthy with a metallic hint, but it was life. I followed the stream, thinking it might lead somewhere. Water usually runs to bigger water, and bigger water often means people. The banks were muddy, and I slipped a few times, soaking my pants and coating my hands in dirt. The woods around me grew thicker, darker, with branches clawing at my clothes as I pushed through. That night I stayed near the stream. The sound of running water was both comforting and unsettling. It masked other noises, made it harder to tell if something or someone was moving nearby. I tried to close my eyes, but the fear of not waking up again kept me alert. My flashlight flickered once and I shook it, praying it would last longer. The thought of being in total darkness made my chest tighten. The second morning came with a heavy fog. It curled low over the ground, wrapping the trees in pale gray. My clothes were damp, my body stiff from sleeping on the cold ground. I forced myself up and kept moving. Every step hurt, my legs sore and blistered. My stomach twisted painfully, reminding me I hadn't eaten. I chewed slowly on the granola bar, breaking it into small bites to make it last. The stream led me deeper, winding in ways that felt endless. At one point, I thought I saw movement through the fog on the opposite bank, a figure tall and still. My heart slammed in my chest. I froze, squinting into the gray, but when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was a tree, nothing more, but I walked faster after that, the hairs on my neck standing straight. By the third day, exhaustion blurred everything. My mind felt heavy, thoughts sluggish. I had finished the last of my food, and the final bottle of water was nearly gone. My lips were cracked, my tongue thick and dry. Each step felt like a fight. My vision swam at times, and I had to lean against trees to steady myself. Then, through the blur of green and gray, I saw something that didn't belong, a thin line of wood cut and shaped. I staggered toward it, heart racing, and found an old wooden fence, half rotted but real. It ran in a line through the trees, and beyond it I spotted the faint outline of a dirt road. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees buckled. I dragged myself to the fence, crawled over it, and stumbled onto the road. The dirt was packed down by tires, fresh ones, and that meant people. I followed it, each step dragging, until I saw the glint of metal through the trees. A parked truck sat on the side of the road, engine silent. I stumbled toward it, slapping my hand against the hood, whispering thank you under my breath. Not long after, I had never planned on staying in the woods as long as I did. The whole thing began simple. I wanted a weekend away from everything. A short hike into a stretch of forest that wasn't too far from where I lived. It was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, just a chance to clear my head. The weather was good, the sky open and blue, and I didn't feel any reason to be cautious. I packed light, only what I thought I'd need for one night out, maybe two, just to get away from the noise of the town and the endless hum of traffic. I wasn't an expert, but I wasn't clueless either. I had a tent, some food, a small camp stove, a knife, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a map folded into my pocket. I had done hikes before, but nothing that far or deep. The trail I followed at first was wide and clear. Dirt pressed flat from boots and bike tires, the kind of path you don't need to think about. I walked steady, enjoying the quiet and the slow sway of the tall pines on either side. The deeper I went, the less I heard anything except the wind brushing through branches, a crow calling every now and then, and the steady thump of my boots on the ground. I remember how good it felt then, the air sharp and clean in my lungs. It was the kind of silence that feels endless. After about 3 hours, the trail narrowed and bent. That was where I made my first mistake. I thought I saw a side path, something less clear, more like a game trail. It curved off into the trees, and for reasons I still don't understand, I took it. I told myself I was exploring, that it might lead to a better spot to camp, closer to water maybe. The map I had wasn't detailed enough to mark every bend, so I figured I'd just keep track in my head. But the trees were tall and thick, and once I stepped in far enough, everything behind me looked the same. I kept walking. The ground was soft with needles, the smell of sap heavy in the air. At first I wasn't worried. I thought I could backtrack easily, and I believed I still had the sense of where I was. But after another half hour I realized I hadn't found water, hadn't found a clearing, and couldn't see the main trail anymore. Every direction looked identical. Rows of trunks, dark undergrowth, patches of sunlight broken into thin beams through the branches. I told myself I'd stop soon, set up camp, and in the morning I'd make it back. I picked a spot between a few large trees, flat enough for my small tent. I made a fire, boiled some water, and ate one of the packets I brought. It was calm, almost pleasant, but my mind kept circling back to the same thought. I had no idea where I really was. That night, the forest sounded different. The sun had dropped and the air turned colder, settling into my clothes until I shivered even with the fire lit. Every sound carried further in the dark, small cracks of branches breaking somewhere unseen, the brush of leaves moving when no wind touched them, something's weight shifting close, then stopping. I told myself it was animals. Deer, maybe a raccoon nosing around. I tried not to think about larger things, bears, cougars. I barely slept. Every time my eyes shut, some noise snapped me awake again. My flashlight beam jumped across the trees more than once, catching nothing but bark and emptiness. In the morning, I packed quickly. I left the ashes of the fire behind and tried to find my way back. I walked in what I believed was the right direction, steady and sure. The problem was, after an hour, I still hadn't seen the main trail. I checked the sun, tried to keep it on one side of me, but the trees bent the light and the ground looked the same no matter where I turned. By midday, I was sweating, my legs burning from moving uphill and down through uneven ground. I stopped to drink, the water from my bottle running low. I hadn't found a stream yet, though I kept listening for it, straining my ears for any rush or trickle of water. There was nothing, just wind, branches groaning, and the occasional crack that made my skin prickle. When I rested, I noticed how quiet it felt. Not the peaceful quiet from before, but something heavier, like the trees were pressing close, swallowing every sound I made. It was then I noticed scratches on a nearby trunk high up, too high for me to reach. Long, rough gouges tearing through the bark. I didn't want to think about what left them. I walked faster after that. By late afternoon, my nerves were starting to fray. I tried to use the map, but it was useless without landmarks. I couldn't see ridges or open spaces, only more forest. My compass pointed north, but knowing direction didn't help when I didn't know where I was in relation to the trail. I felt the panic creeping in, but I pushed it down. I told myself I'd find water, then figure it out. The second night was worse. I set camp again, though my hands shook while I did it. The noises were louder this time. Something moved in the brush and didn't run off when I snapped branches into the fire. I saw eyes once, glowing faint in the reflection of my flashlight. They blinked and disappeared before I could steady the beam. My heart thudded so hard it felt like it shook my chest. I didn't sleep at all that night. By the third day, I was running on almost nothing. My food was limited, and I forced myself to eat sparingly. My water bottle was nearly empty, and still no sound of a stream anywhere around me. My mouth felt dry and sticky, my tongue thick. My head hurt, and every step grew heavier. The woods felt endless now. The tall trees seemed to stretch forever. No break, no open sky. That was when I realized something followed me. I can't say exactly when I knew. Maybe it was the sound at first. Footsteps that weren't mine snapping twigs when I stopped moving. Or maybe it was the feeling, the certainty that eyes pressed against my back. I turned fast a few times, shining the flashlight, but I only caught shadows shifting between trunks. Once far behind me, I thought I saw a shape, tall, broad, moving with slow steps. My stomach dropped and I turned away, forcing myself forward. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, an animal maybe. But deep down I knew the way it moved wasn't right. It wasn't random. It was careful, keeping distance but never leaving. That night I didn't bother with the tent. I stayed by the fire, every muscle tense, my flashlight tight in my hand. At some point I heard breathing. Low, steady, not far away. I froze, barely daring to move, the fire crackling softly at my side. It lasted for what felt like forever, then faded, footsteps brushing away into the dark. By the fourth day, my body felt wrecked. I stumbled more than walked, my vision blurry at the edges. My lips were cracked from thirst and every swallow hurt. I thought I'd collapse, but I kept going because stopping meant something would catch me. It rained that afternoon, a thin, cold drizzle that soaked into my clothes. I held my bottle open to catch what I could, licking water off leaves when I found it. It wasn't enough, but it kept me moving. The rain made the ground slick, and I slipped often. Mud caked into my pants and hands. My pack felt heavier every hour, digging into my shoulders. I don't know how many miles I covered. I don't even know which direction I went anymore. The trees never changed. Always the same endless walls of pine and dark spaces between them. The thought of dying out there sank into me, heavy and cold. On the fifth morning, I woke stiff on the ground, not even remembering falling asleep. The fire had burned out, leaving only black ash. My clothes were damp, my skin clammy. I pushed myself up and noticed something. There were footprints, not mine. Larger, deeper, pressed into the soil only a few feet from where I slept. They circled my camp, stopping close to where my head had been, then moved back into the trees. I felt sick. Whatever it was, had been standing over me while I lay unconscious. I staggered forward after that, barely thinking. just moving because the idea of staying still terrified me. I fell twice, skinning my palms, but I pushed myself back up. I thought I saw the shape again once between the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. Hours later, when I had almost given up, I heard it. Faint at first, then louder. The rush of water. I stumbled toward it, crashing through brush, and saw a stream shining in the light. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I dropped to my knees, scooping water into my mouth, drinking until my stomach hurt. It was the first time in days I felt like I had a chance. I followed the stream after that, knowing water usually leads somewhere. Roads, camps, maybe even the trail. I walked until night fell, then made a small fire by its edge. I thought maybe I was safe now, but when the firelight flickered, I saw movement again across the stream. A figure, not close enough to see details, but close enough to know it wasn't an animal. It stood still, watching, its outline barely shifting. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. That night, I didn't move from the fire. By the 6th morning, the stream widened, and I found signs of people. Plastic caught in branches, a cut log, boot marks pressed into mud. My heart pounded. I followed faster, limping now, my legs weak but pushing on. After another mile, I saw it. A dirt road crossing the stream with tire tracks in the mud. I can't explain the relief. My knees almost gave out. I dropped my pack and sat down, shaking all over. I was out. I was finally out. But when I turned my head, I saw something in the trees across the road. It was standing still, half hidden, just watching me. Tall, broad, silent. My breath caught, and for a long moment neither of us moved. Then a truck engine rumbled far off, and the figure I never thought a simple walk into the woods could turn into something that would still haunt me every time I close my eyes. I wasn't planning to do anything dangerous. I wasn't climbing cliffs or going into deep caves. I was just walking into the forest on a late summer afternoon. It had been one of those heavy days where the air feels close, and I thought some quiet under the trees might clear my head. I parked my car at a small dirt turnout off a back road and stepped into the tree line with only a small backpack, a water bottle, and my phone. I didn't even check if I had service. I thought I'd only be out for an hour or two, then back before the light faded. At first it was peaceful. The woods were thick with tall pines and oaks, the ground soft with pine needles, the air cooler under the shade. A narrow trail led forward, barely more than a deer path, but it was easy enough to follow. I walked, letting my thoughts drift, listening to the sound of birds in the canopy and the occasional rustle of something small moving in the underbrush. I wasn't paying much attention to the direction, just following where the trail seemed to lead. After a while, the trail split. One path went left down a gentle slope. The other went right, climbing slightly uphill. I chose right, telling myself higher ground would make it easier to get a better view if I needed one. I didn't mark the split, didn't note the shape of the trees or any landmarks. I thought I'd remember. The woods grew thicker, the trail more faint. I stepped over roots, ducked under branches, walked farther and farther without thinking about how far I was going. When I finally stopped and turned to look behind me, the trail had already begun to vanish. The way back was less clear than I remembered. The trees looked too similar, the light between them almost identical in every direction. I felt the first flicker of unease then. I took out my phone thinking I'd check the map, but the screen showed no service, just bars empty and useless. My battery was only at 50% because I hadn't bothered charging it all the way before leaving. I slipped it back into my pocket, telling myself I'd be fine. All I had to do was walk back the way I came. I turned and started retracing my steps, but the farther I went, the less familiar everything seemed. I passed a fallen log I didn't remember crossing, a cluster of rocks I hadn't seen before. I turned left at a tree that looked familiar, but when I kept walking, the ground sloped in a direction I didn't recall. The woods were playing tricks on me. I tried to stay calm, but each step felt heavier. The sun had dipped lower, the shadows longer between the trees. I walked faster, then slower, then stopped altogether, straining to hear something that might guide me. There was nothing. No voices, no distant traffic, no sound of water. Just the forest pressing in around me, the steady thump of my heart in my chest. the faint rustle of leaves in a breeze that didn't cool me at all. My unease grew into something sharper when I realized how thirsty I was. I'd been sipping my water without thinking, and the bottle was already half empty. I told myself I'd find the car soon, that I was overreacting, but then I checked the time. I had been walking for nearly 3 hours. 3 hours, and I was deeper than I had ever planned to go. The sun dropped lower. The light between the trees turned golden, then dim. I knew if I didn't find my way out before it set, I'd be stuck in the dark. That thought lit a fire under me, and I pushed forward in what I thought was the right direction. Branches scratched my arms, roots caught my shoes. My breathing grew ragged, shallow, and my chest hurt from the tension. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I still hadn't found anything familiar. The woods grew darker by the minute, shadows turning into black walls between the trees. The air cooled fast, my skin prickling with goosebumps. I pulled out my phone, switched on the flashlight, and the narrow beam cut through the dark, just enough to see the ground in front of me. That little circle of light became my lifeline. I followed it step after step, my legs aching, my throat dry, my stomach growling. Every noise in the woods seemed louder now. The crack of a branch far off, the rustle of leaves nearby. My mind raced with what might be moving out there. Deer maybe, raccoons, but I also thought about coyotes, even bears. The forest was alive around me, and I was just a lost thing stumbling through it. I walked until my legs gave out. My phone battery was down to 20%, the light dimmer than before. I couldn't waste it. I turned it off and stood in the darkness, my ears straining. I had never known dark like that. Not the kind you get in your bedroom at night where light slips in from a street lamp. This was absolute. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing, shaky and uneven, and the faint sounds of the forest moving unseen. I sat against the trunk of a tree, hugging my knees, forcing myself to breathe slow. I told myself I'd wait for dawn. The thought of moving blind through the woods was worse than staying put. I tried to rest, but every noise jolted me awake. A twig snapped nearby once, sharp and close, and I held my breath so long my lungs burned. Something moved past me in the dark. I could hear the crunch of leaves under its weight, and I pressed myself tighter to the tree, heart pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. The sound moved on, fading, but it left my hands shaking, my body cold despite the sweat running down my back. When the first pale light finally crept between the trees, I was already half awake, my body stiff and sore. My throat ached with thirst, my stomach cramped with hunger. I pulled myself up and started walking again, moving slowly, my eyes scanning for anything familiar, anything that might lead me out. Hours passed. I found no road, no trail, no sign of human life. My water bottle was empty by midday, and the heat pressed down heavy, baking the sweat into my clothes. My lips cracked, my head throbbed, and every step felt harder. I thought about calling for help, screaming, but I knew no one would hear me. I thought about breaking my phone's silence and trying 911, but I doubted I had service, and wasting the battery could kill my only light for the night ahead. The second night was worse. I had no energy to keep moving, but I couldn't rest. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound too close. My stomach gnawed at itself, and my tongue felt like sand. I stumbled, fell, scraped my hands and knees raw. At one point I thought I saw light through the trees, but when I pushed toward it, it vanished. It had only been the moon breaking through for a second. By the third day, my mind was slipping. I moved on instinct, dragging my feet, the taste of blood in my mouth from biting my cracked lips. I licked dew off leaves, desperate for water. I chewed on pine needles just to keep my mouth wet. My body was weak, my thoughts scattered. It was late afternoon when I finally heard it, a faint rushing sound in the distance. I pushed toward it, stumbling, branches whipping my face, my legs barely holding me up. The sound grew louder, clearer. Water, a river or stream. When I broke through the trees and saw it, my knees gave out. A wide river cut through the forest, its surface glinting in the fading light. I crawled to the edge, plunged my face into it, and drank until my stomach cramped. The cold water brought me back to life, just enough to think clearly again. I followed the river. I knew rivers led somewhere, to roads, to towns, to people. I forced myself along its edge, step after shaky step. That night, I stayed near it, letting the sound of rushing water drown out the noises of the forest. The next day, I saw it. Through the trees on the far side of the river, a strip of gravel, a flash of metal, a road. I cried, the sound breaking from me raw and loud. It took me another hour to find a shallow enough place to cross, my body numb and trembling by the time I pulled myself up the embankment. I stumbled onto the road, my feet dragging, my skin sunburned and filthy. A car came minutes later. I waved my arms, almost collapsing into the lane, and the driver pulled over, eyes wide at the sight of me. I couldn't even explain, my voice cracked and broken. But I was saved. I had been lost in the woods for 3 days and 2 nights. 3 days that felt like weeks. I learned how fast comfort could fall apart, how quickly the woods could strip you down to nothing but survival. And even now, long after, I can still feel the dark pressing in, hear the snap of a twig too close, taste the desperate dryness of my throat. I can close my eyes and I'm there again, lost under the endless trees with no way out but forward. I thought I knew the woods better than I actually did. I had walked trails before, camped a few nights here and there, even wandered off paths during short hikes. But that day I found myself far deeper than I should have gone. And once I realized how far off I was, it was already too late to turn back with ease. It started simple. I parked my car near a small dirt pull-off not far from a state park, a place I thought I'd explore alone. I wanted quiet, wanted the sound of nothing but trees and leaves under my boots. I didn't bring much, just a small backpack with some snacks, a bottle of water, a thin jacket, and a cheap flashlight. I thought I'd be back before dark. I thought wrong. At first, the walk was peaceful. The path was wide, a little damp from rain the night before, but manageable. The smell of wet earth hung heavy in the air. Birds moved above me, and the low rustle of squirrels kept me company. I followed the trail deeper until I noticed a faint side path, thin and overgrown but tempting, as if no one had walked it in years. I wanted to see where it went. Curiosity pulled me in. The first mistake was leaving the main trail. The second was not marking my way. I pushed through bushes, stepping over fallen branches, and soon the sounds of people, even the faint hum of the road, were gone. I told myself I'd only go a short distance, but each step pulled me farther. I found myself in thick woods with no sign of a real path at all. The trees grew taller and closer together the deeper I went. Sunlight thinned out above me, leaving strips of light on the damp ground. I kept telling myself I would turn back soon, but when I did try, I realized I couldn't remember the direction I had come from. Every clump of trees looked the same. Every log on the ground felt familiar. Though I hadn't stepped over it before, I tried walking straight in one direction. I thought if I picked a line and stuck with it, I'd eventually hit the main trail again. But after 20 minutes, there was no sign of it. My boots sank into patches of moss and mud. Branches clawed at my sleeves. I started to sweat despite the cool air. The first sign of panic was when I checked my watch. I had been walking for nearly 2 hours. The sun was already leaning west, shadows stretching across the forest floor. I felt a hard thump in my chest. I told myself I'd be fine, but doubt crept in quick. I kept moving, trying to find anything familiar. I passed a fallen tree with bark peeled back, beetles crawling underneath. I saw a set of deer tracks pressed into soft ground. For a second I thought about following them, but I knew animals didn't care where trails were. They led only to food and water, not back to safety. I rationed my water, taking small sips. The bottle was already half empty, and I hadn't even thought about how long I'd be out. My stomach tightened, hungry but not desperate yet. Still, I kept going. As the hours dragged, the woods seemed to close in. The quiet grew heavier. Every crack of a branch made me stop. I realized how alive the forest was when you weren't just visiting it. Birds screeched from unseen branches. Something larger moved through brush not far off, maybe a deer, maybe not. The sound of it made my skin crawl. I tried to keep my pace steady, but my legs ached. Thorns scratched my hands. My throat was dry, and the more I thought about water, the more desperate I felt. When I checked my backpack again, I hated myself for not bringing more. I thought of my car sitting safe by the road, my phone useless in my pocket with no signal. As the sun sank lower, the trees grew darker. I realized I would have to spend the night out there. The thought terrified me. I had never camped without a tent, never slept in the open woods alone. I searched for a place that felt safer, somewhere off the wet ground. I found a cluster of rocks near a small rise and sat against them. The forest was cold now, a sharp bite in the air. I didn't sleep much. Every sound jolted me awake. I thought about coyotes, maybe even bears, though I wasn't sure they roamed here. The noises were constant. Something breaking twigs, something breathing heavy in the distance, owls calling from branches above. My flashlight's weak beam gave little comfort. It only showed how endless the woods were. When morning finally came, the light was gray and weak. My body was stiff from sitting against the rocks. I stood slowly, legs trembling. My mouth was dry. I ate half of one snack bar, forcing it down even though it barely filled me. Then I set off again. I tried climbing the small rise, hoping I could see something, maybe even spot the road. But when I reached the top, all I saw was more forest stretching in every direction, endless green and brown, no sign of human life. The second day blurred together. I walked for hours, stopping only to rest my legs. My head pounded from thirst. I found a muddy patch with stagnant water, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. It smelled rotten, a slick layer of scum floating on top. I stared at it for a long time, fighting with myself before moving on. At one point I thought I heard running water. My heart leapt and I followed the sound as best I could. After pushing through thick brush, I found a stream trickling over rocks. I dropped to my knees and drank straight from it, not caring about anything else. The water was cold and sharp, filling my chest with life again. I stayed there for a long while, cupping it into my hands, drinking until I couldn't anymore. That night I stayed near the stream. It felt safer knowing I had water. But the fear didn't go away. I heard something moving close after dark, heavy steps that snapped branches. My chest locked up as I pressed myself against the dirt, holding my breath. The steps lingered, then faded. I didn't sleep at all after that. On the third day I felt weaker. My legs dragged and my vision blurred at times. I had nothing left to eat. My stomach twisted and cramped, making me double over. I tried chewing on leaves just to trick myself, but it only made me sick. I kept walking, but slower now, stumbling often. By the fourth day I started losing track of time. I couldn't tell morning from afternoon. My skin was scratched raw, my clothes damp from dew. I felt like the forest was swallowing me. Every direction looked the same, and the thought of never finding my way out grew heavier with each step. Then I saw it. Through the trees, a faint break in the endless wall of trunks. I pushed toward it with what little strength I had left. Branches whipped my face, mud clung to my boots, but I didn't stop. When I broke through, I saw it. An old dirt road, rough and narrow but real. I dropped to my knees, laughing dryly, though it came out more like a cough. The sight of that road felt unreal, like I had dreamed it. I stumbled onto it and followed it, dragging my feet, my body begging to collapse. After what felt like hours, I saw the glint of metal in the distance. A parked truck sat by the roadside, empty but there. A real vehicle, proof that I wasn't lost anymore. My legs nearly gave out as I reached it. From there, I knew I could wait, that someone would come by eventually. I wasn't trapped in the woods anymore. The fear didn't leave me even then. It clung to me. The memory of being swallowed by endless trees, the sound of unseen steps at night, the taste of dirty water in my mouth. I realized how quickly the forest could take everything from you. Food, water, direction, even your mind. I survived. But I knew I had come close to vanishing out there. Close to being another story of someone who never made it back. And I knew one thing for certain. I would never step off a trail again. I never planned to stay in the woods that long. My idea had been simple. A short hike, a few hours at most, then back before sunset. I thought I knew enough about the area. I had a rough map printed from online, a water bottle, a cheap backpack, and some snacks. I wasn't dressed for anything long, just sneakers, jeans, and a thin hoodie. The weather seemed calm and the trail at the start was wide, clear, and almost too easy. The problem started when I got curious. The marked trail split into a smaller path I hadn't noticed on the map. It bent away through pine trees that stood taller and closer than the ones near the main trail. The dirt there was packed tighter, less traveled, but it looked interesting. I figured I could follow it for a little while and loop back. I didn't even think twice. The air in the deeper woods felt heavier. Not storm heavy, but different, thicker. The trees leaned close together, branches crossing above, blocking sunlight in patches. The ground had more roots, more uneven dips that made me slow down. I remember thinking the place was quiet in a way that wasn't normal. Even my footsteps sounded swallowed up by the ground. I checked my phone for service and the bars were already weak. A small wave of unease passed through me, but I ignored it. I told myself I'd only keep going another 10 minutes before turning back. But 10 minutes came and went and the path grew thinner. What I thought was a trail began blending with the ground. Grass and dead needles spread across it until I wasn't sure if I was still following anything. I pushed forward anyway, certain I could just retrace my steps. When I finally decided to turn back, I couldn't see where I had come from. I spun around slowly, looking for markers, broken branches, or footprints. Nothing. The woods looked the same in every direction. Every tree was tall, grayish-brown, with bark peeling in the same way. The ground was covered in the same mix of pine needles, dead leaves, and soft dirt. I tried walking back the way I thought I had come, but after a few minutes it all blurred together. That was the first real moment fear hit me. I stopped, heart beating faster, and tried to calm myself. I still had daylight. I still had water. I wasn't that far in. People got turned around all the time. If I kept walking in one direction, I'd hit a road or a clearing. That's what I told myself. So I picked a direction and walked. At first, I moved with energy. My footsteps were strong and I felt certain I'd find my way out soon. But after 20 minutes, nothing changed. No sound of cars, no sign of cut trails, no light breaking through the trees to hint at an opening. Just endless rows of trunks, the same ground, the same shadows. My water was half gone already. The sun slid lower, the light dimmer. That's when I noticed how fast the forest darkened. Without the open sky above, it felt like evening came in a rush. One moment I could see clearly. The next, everything was shadows stacked on shadows. I kept walking until I tripped. My foot caught on a root and I went forward, hitting the dirt with my knees and hands. The fall wasn't bad, but the shock of it made me sit there for a long moment. I looked around from the ground level, realizing how quiet it was. No birds, no bugs buzzing. Just stillness and the sound of my own breathing. I pulled out my phone, hoping the flashlight would help, but the battery was low, 15%, no signal. I turned it off to save it. By then, the fear wasn't just in my head. It was in my body. My stomach was tight, my throat dry even when I drank from the bottle. My hands shook when I pulled leaves from my jeans. I felt the cold moving in with the dark. I told myself I should stop moving. If I kept walking blind, I'd only go deeper. I needed to stay put, wait for daylight, and then figure it out. But the thought of sitting still in the middle of those trees was worse. My mind filled the silence with things I couldn't see. I thought about animals, about people, about the stories I'd read of hikers found weeks later. I couldn't sit still. I kept moving. The woods at night are not just dark. They close in on you. Every branch looks like it's reaching out. Every sound, no matter how small, feels sharp and close. A crack of a twig behind me froze my body cold. I whipped around, heart hammering. Nothing was there, but my chest ached from how fast it was beating. I started talking in my head, trying to make rules for myself. Walk slow. Save energy. Keep track of where the moon is. But the moon barely showed through the branches. Just faint patches of silver that shifted with every step. At some point I came across something strange. A tree with marks on it. Not random scratches, but deep cuts, maybe from an axe. The bark peeled in straight lines. I ran my hand over them, rough and sharp. My chest filled with relief for a moment. It meant people had been here. Maybe a campsite nearby, maybe firewood chopped. I followed the trees, hoping for more signs, but the marks stopped after a few. No trail, no campsite, just more endless forest. Hours dragged on. My legs ached, my throat burned, and I felt dizzy. I tried sitting against a tree, but the ground was cold and damp. My hoodie was too thin. The night air cut through it like knives. I hugged my knees, rocked slowly, trying to keep warm. My teeth rattled together from shivers. That was when I heard it. A sound far off, faint but clear. Not an animal. Not wind. It was steady, like metal clinking. I held my breath, ears straining. The sound came again, sharper. My skin crawled. I told myself it could be anything. Someone cutting wood. A piece of metal swinging in the wind. But the sound came at uneven times. Too random. My body screamed at me to move, and I did. I stood, legs shaking, and walked fast in the opposite direction. The wood swallowed me again. The sound faded, but my panic didn't. I tripped more often, scraping my hands on branches, tearing my jeans on brambles. My sneakers were wet from mud I hadn't seen. Time lost meaning. The night stretched into something endless. I couldn't tell if it was hours or minutes passing. My body hurt everywhere. My stomach growled painfully, twisting in knots. Finally, I saw light. It wasn't the moon. It wasn't the stars. It was orange, flickering. Fire. I crouched low, staring through the trees. The glow moved between trunks, steady and real. My heart lifted with desperate hope, but something in me also froze. Fire meant people. But who? I crept closer, step by slow step. Branches scratched my arms, my face, but I didn't stop. I got close enough to see. It wasn't a campfire. It was a torch, wedged into the ground near a small clearing. The flame burned high, wood bound tight with rope. Around it, the ground was disturbed, dirt dark and uneven, as if dug up. I froze at the edge of the clearing. My mind tried to make sense of it. Who put it there? Why? And then I noticed something worse. The ground wasn't just disturbed. It had shapes, long, narrow, uneven shapes, like trenches, shallow and rough. My stomach turned when I realized what they looked like. Holes. Not natural, not random. Dug holes. I backed up slowly, my whole body shaking. My shoe snapped a twig, and the crack echoed like a gunshot. The flame flickered. For a second, I swore I saw a shadow move near it. A tall figure stepping between trees. My heart almost stopped. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. I ran blind, crashing through branches, stumbling over roots. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept going. My brain was only one thought: get away. The night blurred into chaos. I don't know how long I ran or what direction. At some point I fell hard. My ankle twisted, pain shooting up my leg. I hit the dirt and couldn't get up for a long time. My chest heaved, throat raw from breathing. When I finally forced myself up, I limped forward, every step fire in my leg. I didn't care, I couldn't stay near that place. The forest began to thin, slowly at first, then clearer. Branches parted, and I saw open space. I staggered forward and fell onto gravel. A road. I lay there, gasping, staring up at the faint morning light breaking through the sky. My body ached, but I was alive. Cars didn't pass often, but eventually one did. I waved with the last of my strength and they stopped. I never told them what I saw. Not about the torch, not about the dug holes. But I know what I saw was real, and I know I'll never go into the woods again.